Uh, Shout out to everybody in the building, man. Very interesting situation when it comes to Cuba, guys, in the U.S. With the Department of Justice. Now, it's been rumored that America, was planning to take over Cuba. I remember Trump, I think, saying he wanted to make it a American country or something like that, state or something like that. But basically, from a situation 30 years ago, guys, the DOJ has announced charges against Cuban dictator Raul Castro, basically charging him with murder. I think it was 4 murders and something else to do with aircraft, guys, because I guess they took out some pilots 30 years ago, guys. Yeah, man, 30 years ago. But anyway, let's get see what's going on, man. The DOJ announces charges against Cuban dictator Raul Castro, guys. Let's get to it. Shout out to everybody in the building, man. Make sure you are double tapping that screen. That's how you hit the like button, and most definitely subscribe to the channel if you are new, guys. Breaking news: Raul Castro charged by the Department of Justice in the U.S. with either 3 or 4 counts of murder, guys. Let's get to it.
Good afternoon. I'm Madeline Pumariega, president of Miami-Dade College. Welcome to the Freedom Tower. Today we gather at the Freedom Tower for a solemn and meaningful occasion as we welcome representatives from the United States Department of Justice, community leaders, families, honored guests to commemorate the legacy of the brothers to the rescue and honor the victims whose lives were tragically lost in this pursuit of freedom. This ceremony is deeply significant because we stand here at the Freedom Tower, our Freedom Tower, a place that represents refuge, resilience, and enduring hope for those who came to America seeking liberty after fleeing a tyranny and oppression in Cuba. So many of our parents, our uncles and aunts walked through these doors, 400,000 of them, looking for hope and opportunity. Today is their day. For generations of Cuban exiles, this building became more than a processing center. It became a symbol that freedom was still possible, a symbol that democracy, human dignity, and human rights matter. Today, we remember the 4 brave men of the Brothers to the Rescue, whose lives were taken on February 24th, 1996. Not in war, but during a humanitarian mission rooted in compassion and in courage. Their sacrifice became a painful reminder to the world of the brutality of the Cuban regime.
Make sure you guys are double tapping that screen. That's how you hit the like button. Hey, Laleezy. Hey, Miss Fat. What's up, Gina? Shout out to everybody in the building.
We also recognize the countless victims who have suffered under the Cuban regime across generations, prisoners, families separated by exile, those silenced for dissidents, and all who have endured persecution, all in the pursuit of freedom and dignity. Their stories, our stories, are part of the larger story of Cuba, but also the part of the story of Miami and this Freedom Tower itself. As we gather today, may we honor the memory of those not only with reflection, but with renewed commitment to truth, to justice, and to the preservation of the democratic values for future generations. Thank you for being here today for this important commemoration. May God bless each of you, and may God bless the United States of America. And to our brothers and sisters in Cuba, we hear you. Freedom will come. Cuba will be libre.
Breaking news. Cuban dictator Raul
It
Castro
is now my
charged with 4
distinct honor,
counts of murder, guys, by the American DOJ.
representing all of you, to introduce the United States Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche.
Let's take time to double tap that screen, guys. That's how you hit the like button. Get the likes up. Double tap that screen on your mobile device, or click the 3 dots and hit that thumbs up as we find out everything it is to know about why Raul Castro is being charged with murder from 30 years ago, guys.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here in the great state of Florida. Today, we are announcing an indictment charging Raul Castro and several others with conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals. Mr. Castro and the others are charged with additional crimes as well, including destruction of aircraft and 4 individual counts of murder. The indictment was returned by a grand jury sitting in this district in Miami on April 23rd, 2026, and was unsealed today. For nearly 30 years, the families of 4 murdered Americans have waited for justice. On February, this is a story all too familiar. On February 24th, 1996, 2 civilian aircraft operated by Brothers to the Rescue were shot down over international waters by military aircraft from Cuba. 4 men were killed: Carlos Costa, Armando Alejandre Jr., Mario de la Peña, and Pablo Morales. They were unarmed civilians and were flying humanitarian missions for the rescue and protection of people fleeing oppression across the Florida Straits. As alleged in the indictment, Raul Castro and 5 co-defendants participated in a conspiracy that ended with Cuban military aircraft firing missiles at those civilian planes and killing 4 Americans. Those are the allegations returned by a federal grand jury. My message today is clear. The United States and President Trump does not and will not forget its citizens. I want to say that we also do not forget the families, the loved ones, and the friends who have carried grief and heartache for 30 years. For the first time in nearly 70 years, senior leadership of the Cuban regime has been charged in this country, in the United States of America, for acts of violence resulting in the deaths of American citizens. Nations and their leaders cannot be permitted to target Americans, kill them, and not face accountability. President Trump is committed to restoring a very simple but important principle. If you kill Americans, we will pursue you, no matter who you are, no matter what title you hold, and in this case, no matter how much time has passed. I want to thank, and everybody in this room should thank, the FBI, the prosecutors, and the agents who worked on this matter. It includes the intelligence community and our federal and state law enforcement partners. They did the work here, so thank you. There's a reason why myself and the senator and other leadership are here and not in Washington, D.C. to announce this indictment. The community here, you all, understands the history of the Cuban regime better than anyone in America. Many families here know the cost of oppression. I've heard stories over the past week and past months, every one of them heartbreaking. They know that the pain caused by the regime did not stop at the island's shores. And today's indictment, while it does not bring back the murdered victims, it makes a statement. The United States government has not forgotten these innocent men who were shot out of the sky. And as in every criminal case, the defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty by a jury of their peers. But today, the Department of Justice has taken an important step and brought this indictment. I'm proud to stand here on this podium with U.S. Attorney Jason Redding Quinones to my right, Chris Rea, Deputy Director of the FBI. You're gonna get to clap. You're gonna get to clap for Jason in 20 seconds. Chris Rea, Deputy Director of the FBI, and James Utheimer, the Attorney General of this great state. And your great U.S. Senator is here as well. She's very busy in D.C., but wouldn't miss this for the world. So thank you for being here, Senator Moody. So I want to thank Jason for his leadership down here in Florida. He's doing a great job beyond today, and I'd also ask him to replace me at the podium to say a few words. So thank you, Jason, very much.
Make sure you guys are continuing to double tap that screen. That's how you hit the like button. Share it live. Let them know we're talking about Raul Castro being basically charged by the U.S. DOJ, guys.
It may sound a little repetitive, some of the things we're saying, but they're worthy of saying twice, 3 times, 100 times. So bear with us. For nearly 70 years, the communist Cuban regime has acted with impunity in its systematic repression of its people. And for the last 30 years, this regime's senior leadership has gone unchallenged for its murder of 4 Americans. Today, the United States announces a historic indictment charging Raul Castro and 5 co-defendants for their roles in the February 24th, 1996 shootdown of 2 brothers to the rescue. A Miami grand jury has charged these defendants with conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals, destruction of aircraft, and 4 counts of murder. The victims were 4 unarmed civilian pilots engaged in humanitarian work: Carlos Costa, Armando Alejandre Jr., Mario de la Peña, and Pablo Morales. They were not combatants, they were not armed, and they posed no threat. According to the indictment, Raul Castro, then Minister of the Cuban Revolutionary Armed Forces, authorized and oversaw a military chain of command that ended with Cuban fighter jets firing air-to-air missiles at civilian aircraft over international waters. Those missiles destroyed the planes without warning and killed all aboard. For 30 years, the families have waited. The Miami community has waited, and our country has waited. Today is a step towards accountability. This is the first time in almost 70 years that a senior leadership of the Cuban regime has been charged in the United States for acts of violence resulting in the death of Americans. The passage of time does not erase murder. It does not diminish the value of those lives, and it does not weaken our commitment to the rule of law. Standing here in the Freedom Tower gives this moment added meaning. This is the Ellis Island for Cuban refugees. It was the main processing center for countless exiles who fled communist Cuba with the hopes of reaching the American dream. My own mother spent her first night in the United States in this very building. After fleeing brutal communist Cuba, like so many families in Miami, mine understands what it means to arrive here with little more than hope and a chance to rebuild under the protection of American law. That history reminds me of the duty we carry, a duty to seek justice for victims, a duty to stand with families who have carried this pain for decades, and a duty to make it clear that those who kill Americans cannot simply wait out American justice. Today's date, May 20th, also carries deep meaning for the Cuban people. It is their 4th of July. It marks Cuba's independence from colonial Spain. It reminds us that the pursuit of freedom, dignity, and accountability spans generations and still lives alive and well in the heart of the Cuban community. Today's indictment is one part of that long effort. When I came into office in August of last year, I made reviving this case a priority. And I want to thank the team that made it happen. My first assistant, U.S. Attorney Yara Lorenzo Kalukas. And my assistant United States Attorneys, Abby Waxman and Mike Guilfard.
U.S. indicts Castro, guys, of murder, 4 murders from 30 years ago.
For their commitment and drive to seeing this case through. It's incredible work. I also want to thank Mr. Attorney General for his incredible support and steady leadership of the department. And before I conclude, I also want to acknowledge the assistance of Florida Attorney General's office. Attorney General James Upmeyer and his team have been strong partners in this effort. Their support reflects the best of federal and state law enforcement working together in service of justice. With that, I turn the podium over to FBI's Deputy Director, Chris Rea. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I specifically want to thank the Attorney General and, of course, the U.S. Attorney here for allowing me to speak to you all today. And I also want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to showcase the small part that the FBI played. As was stated, today marks a significant moment in a long, long journey for justice. A journey that began 30 years ago with an unprovoked attack on American lives. 4 humanitarians were on a noble mission to help those fleeing oppression. Instead, their lives were violently taken in a reckless act by the Cuban regime. The FBI, the Department of Justice, and countless others never forgot them, and we never stopped hunting for the truth. Today's announcement shows that if it's 5 months, 5 years, 5 decades, we will keep pursuing you, and we'll keep pursuing anyone who intends to harm our citizens, and they will face American justice. I'd like to thank our dedicated special agents, our dedicated prosecutors, our dedicated intelligence analysts, and our dedicated professional staff, as well as our counterintelligence program, for never giving up. Enormous
Ms. Paulin.
credit is due to the many teams across the 16 different FBI cases regarding this matter. The teams who have worked to hold members of the Cuban government's WASP network accountable. Our people have systematically and relentlessly searched for evidence, conducted countless interviews, and pieced together critical intelligence for nearly 3 decades. They turned dead ends into fresh leads. And over the years, that hard work has paid off with convictions of multiple operatives for activities related to that vicious shootdown. The charges we announced today are only the latest milestone on that road to justice, a road paved with persistence, partnership, and extreme resolve. To anyone who spies on our country or harms our citizens, know this: the FBI, the Department of Justice, has a long memory. We will come after you, and we will find you. As I close, I'd like to close with a personal anecdote, as this is deeply personal to me. You see, I was a former member of the United States Coast Guard right here in Miami Beach and Key West, Florida in the 1990s. I conducted numerous humanitarian missions with my fellow Coast Guardsmen, rescuing Cuban citizens who were just trying to find a better life. I also was fortunate enough to act as security during remembrance ceremonies held at the 12 nautical mile limit just outside of Cuban territorial waters. I served on Coast Guard cutters that provided the security to the friends and family who were just trying to remember their lost loved ones. So for me, today brings everything full circle. So in that vein, we dedicate all 3 decades of casework to the memories of the loved ones lost that day. To the victims' families and friends, we stand with you as we hold those responsibilities to account. Now, I'm going to turn it over to the U.S. Senator of this great state, Senator Moody. Thank you.
What a day. What a day. 3 months ago, I joined you on the anniversary to mark the killing of Carlos, Armando, Mario, Pablo. And I said, it was not a cold case. It was never a cold case. It was never a whodunit. We always knew who was responsible for the killing of those young men. That was 3 months ago. And I am so proud to join you today to say we're finally bringing justice to those families, and not just those families. Everyone sitting here today for the past 30 years who have kept this case hot, who have met with me as the Attorney General, who repeatedly met with law enforcement, who repeatedly met with leaders, so many who came together and kept that case hot, like those that are no longer with us, like Lincoln Diaz-Balart. He would be right here in the front row today. They kept it hot. And just 3 months later, we are standing here on this important day when Cuba became a free state, a free people, to say we are living up to bringing accountability to the Castros and the regime that stole that independence. That's what we're doing today. It's an honor to be here today with our acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, as the indictment is unsealed against others, but particularly against Raul Castro for his role in the Brothers to the Rescue murders. This moment has been decades in the making, and I want to thank all of the lawyers who read over all of the trial transcripts, the weeks and weeks of trial transcripts that put back together every piece of evidence and waited for that last piece of evidence to come into view and into your possession, and never gave up. I never gave up. For so many Cuban families, they know you can never become complacent in defending liberty, in fighting for freedom. And Florida is the symbolism of fighting for freedom. We're in the beating heartbeat of that for this nation. So I thank you. Thank you for being here today and remembering what it's like to hold tyrants accountable. And it is why I applaud the Department of Justice for bringing these charges. You know, previous administrations, as those of you met with leadership, reminded them of 30 years ago what happened, previous administrations would release the one person we convicted related to it. Maybe even go down there and go to a baseball game. The last administration decided we were gonna, I don't know, relax our banking restrictions or whatever, maybe coddle them into freedom. But
we need
not this
100 likes, guys.
administration.
Continue to double tap that
They
screen
took the
on
bold
your mobile
step
device or click the three dots,
actually
hit that
bringing
thumbs up,
accountability
subscribe if you are new.
and understanding that accountability works. So we thank President Trump for recognizing that, for being brave and bringing justice for these four men, for their families, and indeed for freedom. And I want to tell you, when Governor DeSantis appointed me to be your newest United States Senator, he did so and said, I want you to take everything you know about this state, every person you've met with, everything you've learned, every battle you've fought to make Florida what it is, take that to Washington and let's get things done. And I am so proud to be here today to say we got things done. And so on today, May 20th, on the day that Cuba became a free and independent state, I would like to end my visit with you by reading the following. And it is a penalty sheet in the Southern District of Florida, United States District Court, advising that Raul Castro will face count 1, conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals, facing a maximum term of imprisonment of life imprisonment. Counts 2 and 3, destruction of aircraft, facing a maximum term of imprisonment on each count of up to 5 years in prison. And counts 4 through 7, the charges of murder, facing a maximum term of imprisonment on each count of death or life imprisonment. God bless you. God bless this great free state of Florida and our United States of America.
Raul Castro, guys, charged for shooting a plane down 30 years ago, unaliving four people, guys. He's been charged now by the DOJ for his crimes 30 years ago, guys. Raul Castro. Breaking news. Make sure you're double tapping that screen, guys. This is how you hit the like
It's
button.
an honor to be here and support Attorney General Blanche, Senator Moody, and your great United States Attorney, Jason Redding Quinones. Communist revolution always begins with the same utopian lie, a classless, stateless paradise of abundance and freedom. But we know the reality. In reality, there is no abundance. nor freedom. Rather, it obstructs individual personal property rights, suffocates merit, and centralizes total power in the hands of tyrants. We've seen what communism has brought us. Over 100 million people that have lost their lives, engineered famines, and the total destruction of human liberty. Just 90 miles from our Florida shorelines, the Castro family has ruled the island with an iron fist. For nearly 50 years, Raul Castro directed the armed forces and served as chief enforcer. The very man who traded the promise of revolution for a prison state. And under his command, and to this day, Cuba remains a dungeon. Political dissidents are ripped from their homes at night under fabricated charges. They're dragged through the streets, beaten, and imprisoned for decades. I know this pain is all too real for many of you in this room. The people have long suffered because of that communist regime. And today that hits very close to home here in the Freedom Tower with the brothers to the rescue. Raul Castro ordered those fighter jets to shoot down unarmed civilian aircraft. It was not an accident. It was intentional, premeditated, state-sanctioned murder. And their criminal conspiracy violated Florida's sovereignty. They embedded spies here in Miami and across jurisdictions down into the Florida Keys, revealing the intelligence that would put these civilian aircraft in the crosshairs. And yet for too long, leaders in Washington looked the other way. They sat by idly. They even attended baseball games with the very man that directed the murders. Not anymore. We're blessed to have a president, Donald J. Trump. We are blessed to have a president in Donald J. Trump who will not bend the knee for communist tyrants. And we are blessed to have Attorney General Blanche and your United States Attorney that advance justice and rule of law and who are not going to politically weaponize government. It's an honor to support them in this endeavor. Last year, right after I took office, I directed our prosecutors to reopen the investigation into the Castros and these murders. Working hand in hand with the U.S. Attorney and supporting his team, we are today one step closer to advancing justice. And the cooperation between the United States and state of Florida could not be more critical than today. Americans deserve justice. Floridians deserve justice. The family members of these men that lost their lives, they deserve justice. Now, going forward, let me be crystal clear. There can be no future for a free Cuba so long as the Castros and their criminal gang of thugs remain in power. We now have the leaders that will pursue that which is right and just. That I know. So get ready. There's more to come. God bless America and God bless the free state of Florida.
This is crazy, guys. Raul Castro charged after 30 years.
So we're going to just take a couple questions, although the questions should be directed to the reason why we're here today and not something else. So are there other reporters? And Pierre.
Attorney General Blanche, key question, why now? Was there a breakthrough in this case? Can you speak to the evidence that leads you to believe that Raul Castro directly participated in the deaths of those Americans who were killed? And I have a follow-up.
Well, I cannot explain or justify why now as opposed to 2 decades ago or 30 years ago when it happened. But what I can say is that you just heard a lot of people talk about a ton of work that the FBI did, state and local intelligence communities, our U.S. attorney and the attorney general's, the state attorney general's team. And that evidence was presented to a grand jury in late April, and an indictment was returned. So I can't, as far as what the evidence is, well, a lot of it's in the indictment, and it would not be appropriate or fair to comment outside of the indictment about the evidence. But as you guys know, a grand jury is presented with evidence and then returns an indictment to the extent that they believe there's probable cause that a crime has been committed, which a grand jury certainly did here.
And quick follow-up, what are the prospects that you could get Raul Castro to the United States to face justice, given the situation there? And what steps are the U.S. willing to take to get him back here?
Well, we indict men outside of this country all the time. And there's all kinds of different ways that we get them here. The reason why we indict somebody is because we want them here to face justice in front of a jury of their peers. So.
What's up, John?
How we go about doing that obviously depends on the circumstances in the case, and I'm not going to go beyond that, but we expect, we didn't indict, this isn't a show indictment. This is an indictment because we expect that there was a warrant issued for his arrest. So we expect that he will show up here by his own will or by another way and go to prison. All right, next question. Yep, go ahead.
Are any others in the Castro family potentially tied up in this? Could there be other charges from members in the Castro family from the Castro regime?
Well, as you just heard, this is an indictment in some ways 30 years in the making. There is not a prosecutor in this room or an FBI agent in this room that ever stops investigating. So whether there will be additional charges, whether are additional defendants charged, who knows? But an investigation like this is never over. And so I assure you, the men and women who have been working tirelessly on this case for the past several months, years, are not just going to retire. So you just point to somebody. I don't.
Good afternoon. Many Cuban Americans are elated, emotional, hopeful on a day like today. What do you tell the Cuban community who is happy about today's announcement, but is wondering how you pursue these charges? What comes next?
I mean, that's the same question I just answered. I think that there's a process that happens, right? And so what's the first process is it's a charge, it's an indictment, and that happens all across this country constantly. And then the next question is, okay, so when is this guy going to show up and you know, appear in court and have a trial or what have you? And I would say to those that wonder whether this is just an indictment or we're going to go away, we're not. So go ahead. Yes, the blue shirt. Yeah. I'll go to the middle next.
Attorney General Blanche, we would like to know what would be the next step to, a lot of people are wondering if there will be any sort of attack, military response from the United States. If this now indictment gives permission for the United States to be closer to Cuba and again, get Raul Castro and those others implicated here to the United States.
So I'm the acting Attorney General of the Department of Justice. We bring charges. So the question you asked is a question that involves the President of the United States, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of State, and doesn't involve the acting Attorney General. So what I can tell you is that this is this indictment, as we've said a bunch of times today, is a result of a lot of hard work and what we believe is an important step in bringing some semblance of justice to the families and friends and loved ones of these men who were murdered. But beyond that, I'm not going to talk about what could happen with Cuba beyond that. Yes, go ahead.
Attorney General Gloria Ordaz from Telemundo 51. Thank you for this opportunity. The next step is going to be an arrest warrant, and I ask you this because the Cuban exile would love to see Raul Castro in the same position of Nicolás Maduro. And
make sure you guys are double tapping that screen if you have not. That's how you hit the like button.
During these days have said that Raul Castro, that this indictment will be more symbolic than practice, and that Raul Castro should probably die in Cuba. What is your message for them?
Well, I'm not going to compare cases, for one. For two, like I said a few minutes ago, we indict men who are not physically within the United States all the time. This is not a new endeavor or adventure for us. And so the way that we get people here who are charged with a crime varies. There's all kinds of different ways. And this is not, there's an arrest warrant issued for a reason, because we certainly expect and believe that Mr. Castro is entitled to his day in court right here in Miami. Sue, yep.
Thank you, sir. Jesse Hirsch with NBC News. You mentioned that the grand jury approved these charges weeks ago. Curious to know what, if any, role the CIA director's visit to Cuba in recent days played in deciding to move forward with announcing this indictment. And
I'm not going to get into why we decided to unseal the indictment today, except to note the place that we're standing and the important day that today represents. But yes, you're right. There's a lot of factors that go into when a sealed indictment is unsealed, if ever. And so beyond just the fact that, look, by the way, it wasn't that long ago. It was late April. It's mid-May. So.
Thank you. One other question. If people look at this and say this is at least partially just a pretext to push for regime change in Cuba, what would you say to people who take that perspective?
I don't care what people look at and think. I mean, we returned an indictment, and that's what we're here to talk about. If people want to speculate or think what they will, I don't care. Okay, one more question. Blue.
Hi, so the final speaker, thank you. Hi, I'm Deborah Acosta with the Wall Street Journal. The final speaker mentioned or hinted at a potential team of people that has been put together to lead the country. Who are those people? Are they in the United States? Are they in Cuba? Is it a mix of both? Can you share a little bit more about that team?
I'm not sure what you're talking about. Can you say it again?
At the final speaker mentioned that there is a team of people that's going to lead this forward.
Huh? Final speaker. So why don't we let the final speaker address that?
And thank you for the new nickname.
Yeah, very good.
Will ever be known as the final speaker.
That's probably easier to pronounce than my last name, Uthmeyer, but I don't think I referenced what you're saying where I talked about people spread across the state. I was talking about the spies and the criminal conspiracy that the evidence has revealed took place. There were spies working from Miami all the way down to the Florida Keys, gathering intelligence and providing it to the regime to figure out where these aircraft were going to be and put them in harm's way. As far as other geopolitical things, I'm going to stay in my lane for now. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes the press conference on behalf of Miami-Dade College and the Freedom Tower. Thank you so much for being here, and you may go upstairs to an exhibit, Libertad.
All right, hold on. We have more on this entire situation with Castro, guys. Hold up.
of Florida, trying to rescue Cubans that were trying to make it across the Straits of Florida in anything that would float, a tire tube, a
Hold up,
makeshift
guys.
life raft. Some even
Let's go
created
here.
boats.
Make the right thing happen in Cuba are happy about. So May 20th, Cuba's Independence Day, finally. Finally, after a lot of us been calling for this, Raul Castro has been indicted. And that is a good day for America, and it's a good day for Cuba. Every one of us up here have been fighting for independence and freedom and opportunity for all the people in Cuba for a long time. First off, let's really acknowledge this. Raul Castro, Miguel Diaz-Canel, they're not legitimate leaders. No different than Delcy Rodriguez is not a legitimate leader. Right? They didn't have an election where everybody had the opportunity to vote. No, they took these jobs. Right? And what they've done is despicable. So Raul Castro finally got indicted for something he did 30 years ago. 3 Americans and 1 resident were murdered. Raul Castro made the decision. Conspiracy to kill Americans. Destruction of aircraft. So, and if you just look at the history of the Cuban regime, on top of being despicable to the people of Cuba, right? They've harbored terrorists. They've been the leader of instability in Latin America. So everything that all the problems we have in Latin America start with the Cuba regime.
All the problems.
So I want to thank the president. I want to thank Secretary Rubio for doing this. I want to thank them for the sanctions they put on. I want to thank them for what they started, which is still work to do in Venezuela, and now what they're doing here to make sure we starve the regime of resources. We sanction them for the despicable acts they take. Now we have a picture. Let's see, where do we have it over here? This is not a Holocaust survivor, right? This is not somebody from World War II. This is somebody that in this year, okay, this is a picture from this year in Cuba.
Wow.
So when Democrats go down there and campaign for the regime, they're campaigning to do this to a human being.
Wow, guys.
Alexander Diaz-Rodriguez is, I think, 45 years old. Look how old he looks in this. You know why? He was starved. He was tortured. He has cancer. They didn't give him treatment. That's the face of the Cuban regime.
Wow.
So again, what the path we're going down has the opportunity for success, the opportunity for the people of Cuba finally, after decades, to pick their own future. On top of that, another thing they do, they traffic doctors. They send doctors to another country, give the doctors a pittance, and they take the same thing for the regime. Sanctioned by the Pan American Health Organization, a sister organization of the WHO. So sanctioned by an international organization that we're a member of. So look, the Cubans have been an unbelievable part of our state. If you look at, every time I go to Miami, if you look around Miami and you look at the success, how vibrant it is, all these things, the reason is that because we have been the beacon of hope for Latin America. We get the smartest, the most hardworking, the people that want to go get out of hellholes. They get to Miami and have been part of building not just Miami but our state. And so I'm very proud of them. But this is a good day. This is a big opportunity to go forward, and I want to thank the Trump administration for doing it. So let me turn it over to the next governor of Florida, Byron Donalds.
Thank you. Senator Scott, thank you so much for hosting us over here. To my colleagues in the House, also from Florida and Miami, Representative Salazar, Representative Jimenez. This is a day of justice for the Cuban people. It's a day of justice for Cuban Americans in Florida and all across the United States of America. For more than 60 years, we have witnessed, very close to our shores, 90 miles off the coast of Florida, we have witnessed a communist dictatorship led by the Castros. And finally today, thank you to President Trump and to the acting Attorney General, Mr. Todd Blanche, for the swift
This is Florida
decision
officials,
to indict
guys,
Raul
speaking
Castro
on the
for his
arrest
crimes
of
against
Raul.
America, against 3 Americans in particular. In 1996, the Brothers to the Rescue were flying in international waters for people who were fleeing the Cuban regime, trying to swim across the strait to Florida. They would go and they would fly and pick people up to get them the aid that they needed, because the Castros have been so disgusting and have been so tyrannical that the Cuban people have been starving. They have no liberty, they have no rights, they have no freedom. And people were swimming across the Florida Strait, and the Brothers to the Rescue were going out on their own to help people get to our shores, to escape tyranny. And they gave the order, Raul Castro, to shoot them down, to shoot them out of the sky. Well, today there will be justice done here in America. And my hope is this trial is in Florida so that Mr. Castro faces a jury of his peers in a nation that stands for freedom and liberty and opportunity, not dictatorship, not despotism, and not communism. So this is a great day for the Cuban people, a great day for the people of Florida, a great day for the people of our country. We want to see justice done, and justice will be done. And if they don't believe us, go ask the former head of Venezuela. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Jimenez of Miami.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to our great senator and the future governor for having us here. I want to say that Mario Diaz-Balart wanted to be here, but he is in appropriations right now, and he's a chair of one of the subcommittees, so he couldn't be here. But certainly, speaking for him, he feels obviously it's a great day. Myself, Maria Salazar, Mario, and Nicole Malitakis signed a letter back in February 13th of this year asking for this to happen. And we're very, very happy that it did happen. And I got to say, Senator, Governor, I admire you very much because you're just plain spoken. You tell it just like how it is. There's no sugarcoating to it. This murderous regime, Raul Castro, murdered in cold blood 3 American citizens and 1 American resident who were on Cessna private planes flying over the Straits of Florida, trying to rescue Cubans that were trying to make it across the Straits of Florida in anything that would float, a tire tube, a makeshift life raft. Some even created boats out of pickup trucks to try to escape that hellhole, which is Cuba, created by the Castro regime. And Raul Castro actually boasted that he was the one that gave the order to shoot down these planes that were on a humanitarian mission over international waters, to shoot them down. Why? Probably because they were causing him embarrassment. This was being shown around the world how thousands of Cubans were putting their life at risk to try to get to freedom. And we don't know how many hundreds or thousands actually perished in the Strait of Florida trying to make it to freedom. And so today is a great day. It's a message, a clear message from this administration, the Trump administration, that we are laser focused. They are laser focused on the Western Hemisphere. They will not tolerate, we will not tolerate dictatorships in our hemisphere, that we will be fighting for the people. And Senator, you're actually absolutely right. These are not legitimate government people. There were nobody elected these people to their positions, just like Delcy Rodriguez. She was not elected to the position, so I call her the interim dictator. And that we need to take additional steps in Venezuela also to bring about freedom and democracy to the people of Venezuela, and turn Venezuela from an enemy to a friend of the United States, just like we have to do in Cuba. Because Cuba is not only denying freedom and democracy to its people, it's also a national security threat to the United States. They're 90 miles from our shores. We just learned recently that they have at least 300 drones in their possession that actually puts, excuse me, the entire southeast of the United States at risk, because these drones have ranges up to 600 miles. And so anybody thinks that Cuba is not a threat, they have been always a threat. They are today, and they will be a threat if they continue to exist in the future. They harbor all of our major enemies around the world. They're an ally to China, to Russia, Hezbollah, all kinds of terrorist organizations. They are state-sponsored of terrorism. And so today's action is a clear signal from the Trump administration, and thank you, President Trump, for the action that you're taking today. The South Florida community thanks you very much. We've been waiting for this day for over 30 years. And yes, yeah, it is justice delayed, but it is justice. And it's also a clear signal, not only to the regime that their days are numbered, but also to the Cuban people that your days of suffering are also numbered. And that one day soon, and today is very symbolic because today is Cuban Independence Day. In 1902, Cuba became independent, an independent nation. They had just fought a war against the Spanish. And that today is the beginning of the next phase of Cuban independence. Independence from a tyrannical, dictatorial regime, which is known as the Castro regime. And so very happy for today. I was born in Cuba, returned to Guantanamo about a year ago, and I made a promise that I would never return to Cuba again unless it was free. I believe I'm going to be able to keep that promise, and I'm going to see a free Cuba in the not too distant future. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, also from South Florida, who represents big parts of Miami, Maria Salazar.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to, that's a difficult act to follow. Delighted to be here next to our great senator and the next governor of the state of Florida, the land of the free. And wonderful to be in front of the news media. And thank you very much for being here. I'm just going to repeat more or less the same thing and just give a few more details of what's happening today. Today is a glorious day. I've been saying it all day long. It's a day that our community has been waiting for 65 years. Proud to say that I represent district number 27, which is where this press conference took place, and where the United States government announced that Raul Castro finally is going to face justice. He was indicted, him and the 4 pilots that were flying those MiGs that shut down, as my colleagues were saying, 2 airplanes that were pretty little, and they were only looking for people to rescue, to call to rescue them from the ocean, from the sharks, call the Coast Guard back in Miami and tell the Coast Guard where those rafts were at so they will not drown. I don't have to tell you that the Castro family is despicable. But thank God that Raul is 95 years old, and today he learned that he could be spending the rest of his life, which everything biology indicates could be short, in a federal prison. If not, look at Nicolas Maduro. One of the things that we have to be very clear when they have asked us, the colleagues from the media, what's the difference between now and then, is that we have President Trump in the White House. That is the big difference. And this is a message to the Castros.
Oh, wow.
Look at Maduro. President Trump gave Maduro the opportunity to go with his wife, with his family, somewhere else, and with the millions that he stole from the Venezuelans. But Maduro thought that he was smarter than President Trump. So I'm talking to Raul, to the cousin, to the nephew, to the son, and to the grandson. Pay attention and look what happened to Maduro. It's time for you guys to go, because there is a new sheriff in town, and that sheriff is Donald Trump. And he is going to be able to do and be willing to do what no other president, 10 presidents, Democrats and Republicans, they are to do with Cuba, which is to make it a friendly country for the benefit, not only of the Cubans, of the Americans. Because if you think about it, when President Trump said that his agenda was America first, this is indeed what's happening. Cuba is the mothership of evil in the Western Hemisphere. Cuba only exports terror. And when Trump said that the Western Hemisphere was important, because it's just like what Marco Rubio was saying, that the proximity of the Western Hemisphere is so close to the homeland that we need to protect it. So this is what's happening right now. Cuba, after the Castros, will be a friend to the United States on the economic front, on the security front, on the political front, on the immigration front. So that's why we thank you, Mr. Trump, for taking this action and for making the Cubans free again and to dear friends of the United States. Thanks to all of you for the opportunity of being here in front of you. And once again, I repeat, it's a glorious day for South Florida, for the Cuban Americans that we represent, and for the United States of America. Thank you.
All right, we can answer any questions anybody has.
Make sure you guys are double tapping that screen. That's how you hit the like button. Support the channel through hitting the like button. Double tap the screen of your mobile device or click those three dots, hit that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and turn your notification bell on to all, guys.
Who are you asking?
Yep.
Yeah, do you want Spanish? Okay.
Why don't we just finish in English and
Yeah,
then we'll
do
move
Spanish.
into Spanish?
Well,
if that's okay.
first off, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but I want Raul Castro to go. Would you like him to be in prison? Sure. Would you like him to serve time? Sir. Would you like? But if he gets out and we get democracy and the people of Cuba have an opportunity, that's a good day.
Yes.
I'm interested in methods. Do you think this fast tracks regime change in Cuba? And if you support that, how would you do it? Would you do it through economic pressure, military means?
Well, Castro controls all the money. All right, they control all the money. So hopefully now the money's drying up because of what Trump has done. But if you look at the people of Cuba, they're willing to fight for their freedom. They've been doing it. Unfortunately, the Diaz-Canal has been putting these peaceful protesters like Alexander in prison. And so hopefully now they're seeing that America will stand up for them, that they'll do it on their own. But if it takes something, we should not take anything off the table. I mean, the same thing happened to Maduro should happen to Raul Castro. But I'm not going to get ahead of whatever the Trump administration wants to do. Yes. I wouldn't stand trial. Well, the right thing is you have to stand trial. In this country, you stand trial. So he needs to stand trial. And, based on the evidence we know, he would be in prison the rest of his life. And everybody around him that was part of that, they would be in prison also.
The Foreign Minister of Cuba, Bruno Rodriguez, says he will continue fighting despite U.S. action. What do you have to say about this?
Ha ha
Keep
ha.
going. That's not going to go well.
Ha.
Let me say this, okay? The foreign minister of Cuba is not part of the ruling establishment of Cuba. The ruling establishment of Cuba is actually a somewhat free enterprise system called GAESA. GAESA is really headed by Raul Castro. They control 70% of Cuba's economy. As a matter of fact, the budget of GAESA is actually larger than the budget of the Cuban government. And so really, Diaz-Canal and all that apparatus, they're just figureheads. GAESA are the real people that are controlling Cuba today. So a foreign minister can say whatever, the president can say whatever, it doesn't matter. It only matters really what Raul Castro and GAESA are saying. And what is, and a little education, what GAESA is, all right? GAESA is an organization made up of military personnel that control all economic activity on the island.
Hotel.
Everything. They control everything. They have billions of dollars at their disposal. Today, 15 billion, I'm hearing. $16 billion today that they have, and yet they don't buy oil, they don't buy food, they don't buy medicine. What they do is they build hotels and whatever it is that they think that they can put money in their pockets. They are thieves, disguised as revolutionaries. They don't even believe in communism.
They live in opulence.
They do, okay? And so everybody suffers, and they, them and their children and relatives go off in a jet set world, date Hollywood stars, all right, while the people of Cuba are suffering. So it doesn't really matter what the foreign minister says. He's got nothing to say, or his words mean nothing because he doesn't really govern Cuba. I want to listen to what GAESA people have to say.
Let's put this into context. Cuba, GAESA has $16 billion in reserves. And GAESA, as the congressman said, is an institution within the government.
Let's get those likes up, guys. Double tap that screen. If you have not, double tap your screen. That's how you hit the like button.
The Castros and the Ayatollahs is that the Castros do not have resources. Russia is not helping them anymore. Venezuela is gone. And Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, President Trump, sent a very clear message that she could not be helping these thieves any longer, which we agree. We very much appreciate the fact that she stopped. So when you do not have oil or food or electricity or water or medicine, how are you going to repress? It's a very big question. Like Carlos was saying, they have $16 billion in reserves. Let's find out and I'm sure the Department of War will figure out what are they going to do that money with. If they are going to indeed attack, or they are going to create a military problem for the United States. We know exactly how we're going to be responding, but that is up to the secretary. What's important is that I do believe that Raul, and there's only Raul, his 2 daughters, his son, and his grandson, and his nephew. We're talking about 6 Castro family members. If they decide to go, I agree with the senator that I would love for them to die in jail. But if it's the best thing for this country, for the United States, and for the Cuban people, but first for the United States, for them to just go, I'm sure that my constituents, the largest Cuban exile community in the country, will be okay with that. Not happy, but we'll be okay.
They want them to go, guys. They would prefer them to ride in jail, but they want them out of the country.
Right. Well, I mean, first and foremost, the regime has to end. And so I agree with what my colleagues have said about Raul and the family. Of course, we want him in jail, but if they leave, they leave. The second key thing is going to be working with whatever semblance of government that exists in a free Cuba to reestablish the constitution that works for the people of Cuba, actually have a system of security, a system where, you know, you can set up a judicial court system to operate. You have to also figure out how you're going to manage direct foreign investment that would go to an open and free Cuba, how you're going to guarantee contracts in that type of a system. Florida stands ready to cooperate with the free Cuba.
So they're still giving them the option to leave,
our port
guys.
systems, both
Raul
our
can
seaports
leave.
and our airports are fully equipped and ready with investment moving through the United States of America, coming from Florida.
I think if I was him, I'd be packing my stuff to get up out of Cuba, guys. They still giving them the option to leave.
Florida will fully cooperate with a free Cuba. Florida will not cooperate with some amalgam of a new dictatorship if the Castros are gone.
If you just look at Miami for a second, there's unbelievable numbers of successful Cuban businessmen and women, and so people will go back and invest, but they're not going to invest unless there's freedom. There's exactly what the congressman said, that there's a rule of law. You have your contracts are going to be enforced. The people have freedom, but if you do, it's a beautiful. Anybody that's been there, I was there in the Navy in the Guantanamo Bay. It's a beautiful island. They got great beaches. And it's a wonderful place to go. And actually, if you look at the Cuban people, it's an industrious people. They want to work hard. They're smart. So there's a massive opportunity for people to invest in Cuba if they have freedom and democracy.
I agree with that. Let me say one. In 1959, Cuba had the second highest standard of living in the Western Hemisphere. Cuba was the jewel of the Caribbean. Cubans around the world are highly successful. We're successful in business, we're successful in entertainment, in the arts, music, wherever Cubans go. And I know that I'm Cuban, I'm saying, hey, wow, we're really good people. But really, when you look at it, pretty successful people around the world. There's one place that they're not successful. That's Cuba. And so if Cuba was free and we had democracy, it's a great opportunity for the state of Florida, okay? Most Cuban Americans are there. Most of us want to go back to help in the rebuilding. The rebuilding, it needs unbelievable amount of work. A lot of that's going to come from the United States. So there's tremendous business opportunities. So for the state of Florida, it's actually a boom. For the Cuban people, a boom too, because you have almost a clean canvas to rebuild Cuba to bring it into a 21st century, which will then be a partner.
Let's get the likes to 200, guys. We need 40 more people to double tap the screen of their mobile device. Double tap their screen. Or click the 3 dots, hit that thumbs up.
We have democracy, and the relations with the United States with freedom and democracy are going to be really outstanding, that Cuba will rebound fairly quickly and will be a great partner to the United States and to the state of Florida.
Let me just add a couple of more figures to what my colleague was saying. The Chinese, continental China, before it started being prosperous, had something called the overseas Chinese. Cuba has the overseas Cubans, just in South Florida, the GDP and what we produce in South Florida is many times over what the Cuban regime produces. So right there, it gives you a perfect example with numbers of what a free Cuba with overseas Cubans going in with capital and know-how could do with that island. That island can turn into Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, only 90 miles away from Miami. And we know that because we live among the Cuban Americans who are eager and highly, with a high desire to go back and forth. So for Florida and for the United States, no doubt this will be an economic boom in the making.
Let's do two more questions. You have one over here.
Yes, sir. I want to get the reaction. Senators Kane, Schiff, and Dyer today are basically anchoring U.S. hostility.
Well, first off, I'm disgusted by what the Democrats have done. They've gone down there to prop up the Cuban regime. That's the face of the Cuban regime. There's a guy, Hassan Piker, they campaign with, that went down there with him, that wants me murdered, wants all the capitalists in this country murdered. And Democrats are campaigning with him. So it's going to be a typical, I don't get the Democrats. Like, don't they want to live in freedom and democracy? Don't they want people in Cuba and Iran and places, don't they want them to have the same opportunities you and I have? But it's like they don't. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything.
No, it makes zero
No
sense.
problem,
The fact that you have
Alexis.
Democrat senators who want to stop the United States government and stop President Trump from doing what he can to help free Cuba from more than 60 years of totalitarianism and a dictatorship. But then the same Democrats will come here and lecture everybody in America about how they're the only ones that stand for freedom, that stand for democracy. Give me a break. They're lying. But this isn't new. They lie about this stuff all the time because we work in these halls. And when we try to just do simple common sense policy to actually open up America's economy for the American people, drive down costs, have healthcare that makes sense, you know who stops us? The same Democrats who go on the trail and talk about how they're the only one standing for the little guy. That war powers resolution that they're bringing is indicative of the fact that the Democrats will tolerate totalitarianism on their watch. And they will let it happen. They will watch people starve. They will watch people be oppressed, and they won't lift a finger, but they'll go to their cocktail party and talk about how they stand for freedom and liberty and democracy. Give me a break. I don't listen to them anymore. And that resolution is why.
Okay, this is the last question. Oh, do you want to say something?
I do. I say there isn't one dictatorship that the Democrats don't support. Look around the world. Okay, it's always America's fault. Why are we doing? Why? It's amazing to me that they would go down, Democrats would go down and blame the United States for the woe that is Cuba, when it's the regime that has caused the suffering of the people of Cuba. And it's the ideology that has caused the suffering of not only the Cuban people, but people from around the world. But that ideology somehow fits their ideology. And so they'll excuse anything, because it's tough to say, gee, I think I was wrong. I think I was wrong. Maybe communism and socialism doesn't work all that well. Maybe they do suppress the people, oppress the people. Maybe they are anti-democratic. And so when they come in these halls and they say, we're the defenders of democracy. Yeah, really? You're the defenders of democracy, and you go around the world defending all those dictators and then blaming the United States? It makes me sick to my stomach. Thank you.
Last one. Yep. Oh, we'll do this, then you'll do that. You guys can do Spanish. Okay. First up, I don't believe you should. If I was the president, I would never take anything off the table. I don't think we should suggest we ever take anything off the table. I don't think it's going to take military action. And this president doesn't like military action. He doesn't want to put troops in harm's way, but he does want to defend this country. So I think the people of Cuba are going to rise up. I think you would like answers in Spanish. Yeah, go ahead. You guys want to?
Okay, la pregunta.
We ain't finna be speaking no Spanish, guys.
Esa es una muy buena pregunta y nadie sabe verdaderamente la
Speak in
respuesta.
Spanish. We
Por
ain't
en la
speaking
Casa
no
Blanca.
Spanish.
De la religión.
Terrible. But ese es el cargo de.
They did it all over again in Spanish. All right, so that was a little bit more on this situation. Did y'all know that they were threatening to strike us with drones, guys? I had no idea. Check this out. Cuba threatened to strike us with drones.
Is reporting the communist island nation is buying attack drones from Russia and Iran. So far, some 300 drones. And the communist government of Cuba recently began discussing plans to potentially use those drones to attack U.S. targets, including Guantanamo Bay and possibly Key West, Florida. Here's retired Navy SEAL Mike Sorelli.
I had no idea,
The drones are
guys.
concerning one sourced by both Russia.
So could this kind of be behind it? You know, Cuba is over there without power right now, without gas, without oil, due to the situation going on in the Strait. They can't get the resources they need. The power grid is overwhelmed, guys. They're in the dark over there. It's crazy, man. You know what I'm saying? And yes, Stephanie, that's what I said when I seen it. They were buying drones, guys, to try to strike the U.S. allegedly.
Iran. Would Cuba make the fundamental mistake of attacking the United States? It would be their doom. For Cuba, what Trump has done is put them into a position where this regime can fall without a shot fired. We saw Maduro in Venezuela go down. Now Iran, another source of financing and material support for Cuba. They are isolated. The best scenario for them is to play ball, or they will lose this regime.
So listen to this. Cuba's foreign minister accused the United States of fabricating a, quote, fraudulent case to justify economic sanctions and potential military intervention. And this quote, Cuba neither threatens nor desires war. Here's Cuba's nightmare, though, an extreme energy crisis. Look at that. Their power grid has collapsed, triggering crippling blackouts. The Trump administration is aggressively pressuring the regime to reform and demanding the removal of foreign spy technology. And focus with me now. Former Miami mayor and Cuban American Francis Suarez.
This is crazy, guys.
First of all, is it even realistic that they would hit Guantanamo Bay and other U.S. targets with those drones they bought?
It's hard to believe.
Right under our
even the
nose. I
300
bet y'all didn't
drones that they have,
even
and
know
actually seeing
that.
pictures of what they look like would have the capabilities of penetrating our air defense and actually hitting sovereign American territory. However, it's something you have to take seriously. You know that they have, and there's reports that Iranian, people have come to the country and are teaching them.
Let's
on
get
their
those likes
technology and
past
how it's
200,
succeeded
guys.
in
Double
Iran
tap that screen
in,
if you have not.
trying to maintain control of Hormuz and strike U.S. bases. So they're collaborating with our enemies. And they've been collaborating with our enemies, whether it's China or Russia, for decades. Remember that Russia taught Cubans how to spy through KGB training, and that China has been using
What's up, big
Cuba
fat?
as a spy base just 90 miles away. So none of this makes us feel good. And I think Secretary Rubio and his team have done an excellent job of understanding what the real threat of Cuba is. Not just military, not just spying, but also it's a threat of inculcating poverty in our hemisphere, which creates immigration pressure in the United States. If you don't like illegal immigration, you shouldn't want the current regime involved.
So that is a really interesting point. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today is because you have a unique understanding of Cuba. I mean, as the mayor of Miami, you had a lot of reason to keep your eye on those people who sometimes try to make their way illegally into this country via there.
Yeah, let's just say I would be persona non grata in Cuba right now with the Cuban government. My father, of course, was the first Cuban mayor of Miami. My father was the first Cuban mayor of Miami. His father was jailed by Castro, and my uncle, his brother, was killed in a Cuban jail. So we have a long history of opposing the Castro regime and the communist regimes. Why? Because we understand fundamentally that it does absolutely nothing for the Cuban people. The per capita income of Cubans is $5,000 a year. Of course, what we've seen in the Cuban diaspora and the exile community in Miami is a community that's thriving. Miami has the lowest unemployment in America, the highest median wage growth in America. So what's happening? We've embraced American exceptionalism. We are legal immigrants to this country, and we are prospering under a capitalistic system, while Cubans are living in the dark ages, essentially, and they're being repressed.
Yeah, I mean, they have no grid. They literally are living in the dark. Real quickly, just in terms of what we face, it's not 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. But 300 drones, if they aim them in certain spots and hit vulnerable targets, can do some damage. Do we go kinetic early? Do we prevent? Your quick thought on what the next steps for President Trump should be.
My quick thought is you don't send the CIA director to a country if you're not serious. I think this is part of what I call the boa constrictor strategy, where he continues to constrict and create pressure so that he can negotiate with higher leverage and then act if the opposing person or the opposing country doesn't react or doesn't make the right decision. It's very clear the strategy has been articulated and executed in Venezuela, Iran, and they're not mincing words. The CIA director said by social media, do not make the same mistake that Venezuela made. He said it in his own words. So I don't think that they're hiding the ball. They've been very transparent about their strategy, and they've been very successful in creating generational peace and prosperity for our country.
Francis Suarez in the focus today. Thank you and welcome to the Fox family as a new Fox News contributor. Good to see you. Be sure to like and subscribe for all.
That's crazy, huh? Just like I said, I bet you a lot of y'all didn't even know about this drone situation, man, but it has been in the news, guys, as the DOJ announces charges filed against Raul Castro, guys.
As in the wake of the CIA director's visit to Cuba, Axios now reporting that Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones and recently began discussing plans to use them to attack the U.S. base at Guantanamo Bay and possibly even Key West, Florida. The reporting
This is
comes,
crazy,
Axios
guys.
says, from
And right after this,
classified
they
intelligence that was
announced
shared
these
with the
charges.
publication, and that it would show a degree to which the Trump administration views Cuba as a threat. Now, we're also getting other reaction coming in here. This is via Reuters, as we heard from the Cuban foreign minister, who is now accusing the U.S. of fabricating a, quote, fraudulent case to justify economic sanctions and potential military intervention. The minister's comments followed that report we mentioned by Axios, citing classified intelligence, which said Cuba had acquired more than 300 military drones. Now, that's a lengthy statement on your screen, but the Florida Keys sheriff there in Monroe County, Florida, saying he has not been contacted by any federal or state authorities and will keep the public updated as all of this develops. Right now, I do want to bring in Brian Fonseca, director of the Institute for Public Policy at Florida International University. He is also the vice provost for Defense and National Security Research. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and helping to kind of break it all down for us.
No, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. And first off, I want to kind of get your take on all of this as a whole, as we hear this report from Axios, and then we hear from some of the officials there in Cuba saying it's not true.
Yeah, I mean, right now, it's important to understand that the U.S. has been applying economic coercion and diplomatic pressure, essentially economic pressure, diplomatic pressure, in an effort to try to sort of evoke some type of transition in Cuba away from Diaz-Canel and the Castros.
Do you guys believe that they had over 300 drones, guys?
Democracy on the island. And I think that certainly over the last week, the U.S. has been signaling that it's willing to go, or it's preparing to go beyond sort of merely economic and diplomatic pressure, and maybe looking at other more blunt instruments of national power. And of course, what I've been looking for to sort of assess, the degree to which the United States is preparing to go, I'm looking for signaling that might, insinuate that the military is at play. And certainly this release of classified information to the public through Axios may be a means of justifying Cuba is an imminent threat, which might unlock U.S. military.
Shout out to Big Facts for that $2. Appreciate it.
Power in the case of provoking change going forward.
And this is some of the video here coming in out of Cuba. We've been showing it here for several days as it's been kind of a similar situation, but also wanted to kind of get your take on the statement coming in from Florida's sheriff there for the southernmost county. That's Monroe County, essentially saying right now, I have not been contacted by anyone, and trying to reassure the public.
Yeah, I mean, again, it may suggest that an attack from Cuba was not imminent, but certainly that the Cubans might have been talking about how to repel the Americans if the United States was to leverage the military, to some type of offensive action within the island. And again, this may be just that it's not imminent and sort of federal government hasn't reached out to the state and local government. Nonetheless, I think this is still part of this bigger effort that the United States is very intentionally trying to provoke change in Cuba. And again, the signaling, whether it was the CIA visit last week, the likely unveiling of indictments against Raul Castro and perhaps others later this week, and now this Axios report of information that was passed from the U.S. government may be a means of laying the foundation for either enhanced law enforcement or military operations on the island at some point in the future.
And at last check, Raul Castro, I believe he's in about his mid-90s at this point. So what would you say is maybe the purpose of that indictment overall? Because I have to imagine that we're not talking about him going to prison for a lengthy time. Again, he's about 94 years old.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think, I see the purpose of the indictment sort of in two ways. I think, one, there's a degree of symbolism to it, right? I mean, it's a symbolic gesture that the United States is holding Raul Castro accountable for decades of human rights violations. And in this particular case, the authorizing of the shootdown of the Brothers to Rescue plane just about 30 years ago, February of 1996. And I think, again, symbolism is there. I think, second, it is about pressure, applying pressure. And again, this may be laying the foundation for enhanced law enforcement activities to happen on the island. Again, in pursuit of an indicted criminal in American courts, the U.S. used a very similar case when they went after Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, where, Secretary Rubio argued that it was a law enforcement-led activity that was supported by the military, but it was in pursuit of an indicted criminal wanted and needing to stand trial in American justice. And so I think this could be both symbolic and the laying of foundation for other instruments of American national power.
I want to go kind of in reverse a little bit. Can you talk about how the relationship between the U.S. and Cuba has kind of changed over the years and decades?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, the rise of Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution, which pushed so many Cubans out of the country and into the United States, into places in very close proximity to where I am now in South Florida. And I think sort of, Fidel Castro's, terrible human rights record, kind of purging political opposition and dissent on the island, his alignment with America's geopolitical.
Shout out to Rika for being a member of the Sidewalk for the last 20 months, guys. Shout out to her. Yeah, most definitely. Shout out to you, Rika. Shout out to you for being a member. Memberships are most definitely available. Just check the description box of any video on this channel and you'll be able to find it. Become a member today. Shout out to y'all. Make sure you guys are double tapping that screen. Subscribe to the channel if you're new.
Rivals at the time during the Cold War, it was certainly the alignment
Thank
with the
you,
Soviet
Rika.
Union. But even in the more contemporary period, Cuba has been aligned with American rivals like China, Russia, and Iran. And I think the United States has sort of articulated that as a national security concern. Cuba continues to, sort of pillage its democratic opposition, essentially not allowing democratic opposition to thrive on the island through massive human rights violations and abuses. And I think, again, that has continued to impede any type of U.S.-Cuba rapprochement. And I think the U.S. now is at the point where it's leveraging not just economic and political coercion, but certainly other instruments of national power to displace autocracies in the Western Hemisphere, which is now part of the tip of the spear in American foreign policy and national security strategy.
All right, Brian, what should we be watching for here as we kind of see all of this develop and play out?
Yeah, so I would be looking for the indictments later this week to see how extensive those are and how encompassing they are in terms of members of the sort of Cuban regime. Then I'd be looking for military movements, a buildup of military off the coast of Cuba, similarly to what we saw in Venezuela. And maybe it's not off the coast. Maybe it's just a repositioning in South Florida in the Keys in order to take military action. So that's what I'm going to be looking for next, the extensiveness of the indictments and, of course, movements of military or law enforcement equities that may be used to mount some type of offensive against the island to displace change. Otherwise, you're looking for a fracture. You're looking for Cuba to essentially blink first and enact some form of serious reforms that appease the Americans and sort of stop the movement of more kinetic operations on the island.
All right, Brian Fonseca, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Anything we missed that you want to make sure to add before I let you go?
No, I think you covered it all. And again, this is about rectifying the fact that the Cuban regime has been incredibly vile towards human rights, and that the United States is now sort of pushing Cuba to force a reform and a change, and hopefully a prosperous return to democratic governance.
All right, Brian, thank you again for taking the time to join us. We definitely appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again as all of this continues to develop.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, guys. So we got a little bit more, guys, on those 300 drones that Cuba was alleged to have bought from Russia, in China. That's crazy, guys. Stockpiling weapons over there. Then all of a sudden, the dictator gets an indictment, guys, from the United States. More on that situation. We got a speech coming up from Trump here in a second, guys.
A time ago, the Department of Justice unsealed criminal charges against former Cuban President Raul Castro. Prosecutors charging him with conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals, destruction of an aircraft, and 4 counts of murder. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche saying this to Cuban Americans who have been demanding justice for years.
We also do not forget the families, the loved ones, and the friends who have carried grief and heartache for 30 years. For the first time in nearly 70 years, senior leadership of the Cuban regime has been charged in this country, in the United States of America, for acts of violence resulting in the deaths of American citizens. Nations and their leaders cannot be permitted to target Americans.
Let's get reaction on this historic indictment live from Havana with CNN's Patrick Ottman. Patrick, how are Cuban officials reacting to these new criminal charges?
We're finally getting some reaction after really silence all day long that this indictment was coming, as everyone has known for days. And this is Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel. I'll just read a little bit of it. But he says that the indictment against Raul Castro, quote, just announced by the U.S. government, only reveals the arrogance and frustration that the representatives of the empire feel toward the unyielding resolve of the Cuban Revolution. He goes on to say that there's no legal basis, that Cuba 30 years ago was defending itself against the Brothers to the Rescue planes, which, as we know, were unarmed, but the Cuban government had accused them of coming into Cuban airspace previously. So officials here are very angry. They're not surprised by this. Certainly after we saw Nicolas Maduro get taken by U.S. Special Forces at the beginning of the year, they have known that this could be coming, that this was in the works. They have been threatened by the U.S. As we have seen this relentless pressure campaign go on to try and force Cuban government officials to make larger concessions to the United States, to open up their political and economic system here, something they have refused to do now as they have engaged with the Trump administration. But negotiations just really don't seem to have gone anywhere. And the question is now, does this added pressure, indicting not only a former president, but still the most powerful person on this island, the individual who is head of the military, that has handpicked every political and military leader that is in power at this point, that officials tell us still oversees all the major decisions from retirement that this island takes, particularly when it comes towards relations with the U.S. Does indicting him make a deal more likely or less likely? There's a lot to say about the fact that Cuba feels that an invasion is coming. You see every day officials telling their population to get ready. There are military maneuvers taking place. So certainly what the Cuban officials are telling their people, who are very worried about this, not particularly about what it's going to happen to officials, but what it means for themselves, are already an island that is on the point of breaking. If there is some sort of attack on this island, what would that mean for them? Already the power's off most of the day. Food has become more scarce and expensive. So there is a lot of concern amongst regular Cubans about how this could impact them if the breakdown of law and order of their government would essentially create a humanitarian crisis.
Patrick Ottman live for us in Havana. Thank you so much for that update. The acting AG, Todd Blanche, was actually asked what was next. What was the next step in this? Would we see the United States intervene in Cuba and extradite the 94-year-old Castro the way that the U.S. did in Venezuela in its extradition of Nicolás Maduro? Here was his response.
Yes, go ahead.
Attorney General Gloria Ordaz from Telemundo 51. Thank you for this opportunity. The next step is going to be an arrest warrant, and I ask you this because the Cuban exile would love to see Raul Castro in the same position of Nicolás Maduro. And a lot of legal experts that we have interviewed during these days have said that Raul Castro, that this indictment will be more symbolic than practice, and that Raul Castro should probably die in Cuba. What is your message for them?
Well, I'm not going to compare cases, for one. For two, like I said a few minutes ago, we indict men who are not physically within the United States all the time. This is not a new endeavor or adventure for us. And so the way that we get people here who are charged with a crime varies. There's all kinds of different ways. And this is not, there's an arrest warrant issued for a reason, because we certainly expect and believe that Mr. Castro is entitled to his day in court right here in Miami.
CNN senior national security reporter Jennifer Hansloff kicks off our coverage. So Jennifer, just in terms of these criminal charges being announced against Raul Castro, I mean, this is all part of this pressure campaign, an economic pressure campaign and a political pressure campaign that the U.S. is really leveraging over the island. Just walk us through what we can actually expect.
Raul Castro charged with 4 counts of murder, guys. By the
That's right, saying this is a
DOJ.
significant escalation in that ongoing campaign against Havana. When we hear from Todd Blanche, we expect him to kick off, of course, with the fact that the U.S. has now indicted the former president of Cuba, Raul Castro, stemming back toward that 1996 shoot down of a plane that killed 3 Americans. Now, they have just unsealed that indictment against both Castro and 5 other defendants. The charges that were unveiled against Castro are conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals, destruction of aircraft, and murder. So they are going to announce those charges. Among the other defendants is one of the pilots on the Cuban aircraft that did shoot down that U.S. plane that was going towards Cuba for what they say was delivering humanitarian aid and assisting with a humanitarian effort. The Cubans at the time said that it was their airspace. The U.S. contends that that was international airspace in which they were shot down. Of course, this indictment is decades in the making, but the context of it being announced today is, of course, among that pressure campaign to try to drive out the Castro regime from the government of Cuba. This comes hours after Secretary of State Marco Rubio released a video message directly to the people of Cuba. He did this in Spanish. He was saying that the Trump administration is ready to work with the Cuban people, and the only thing standing in the way is the government that is currently in charge. Take a listen to something else he said in that message.
We are offering $100 million in food and medicine for you, the people.
Thank you
but
for
they
the
must
flow
be
state.
distributed
Thank you.
directly by the Cuban
Thank you for the
people,
gift.
by the Catholic Church or other trusted charitable groups, not stolen by Gaeza to sell in one of their stories. In the U.S., we are ready to open a new chapter in the relationship between our people and our countries. And currently, the only things standing in the way of a better future are those who control your country.
And of course, it's significant, too, that he brings up that offer of humanitarian aid as this economic blockade on the island has continued to squeeze the situation on the ground. There are rolling blackouts. There are shortages of food. And Rubio and the Trump administration is trying to put the blame for that not on the administration's policies, but on the Cuban government. What seems to be an attempt here to have the people of Cuba perhaps rise up against their sitting government there. Now, of course, the other thing to note with this indictment is that this is following perhaps a similar playbook to what we saw in Venezuela, where the United States leveled an indictment against Nicolás Maduro, only to then take military action to remove him from that country. Now, we don't know whether it's something like that is in the offing here in Cuba. However,
So keep that in mind. She said Maduro. They keep on comparing Castro's arrest to his arrest. We're going to see basically how these two cases are similar but different. Let's check it out, guys. We're gonna see. Let's go here.
O'Donnell first to kind of go through some of this terminology we heard from the acting attorney general. He said this is not a show indictment, and Kelly, I've been going through it during this news conference, and he's right. There is not a lot of, I would say, smoking gun evidence here, at least when it comes to Raul Castro. Essentially, as Jose pointed out, the one piece of evidence they say is that as leader of the military, he greenlit all the operations and that they had trained these MiG pilots to focus on small aircraft. They had done this for a couple months in the lead up to the shooting. But beyond that, we don't see a smoking gun here. Is that a fair assessment of the indictment the way we see it?
Based on what I've read through, it's about 19 pages, Tom, and part of it gives you a sense of the history of this case and some of the specifics, about as specific as it gets, is what you're referring to. It says all orders to kill by the Cuban military traveled through this chain of command with Castro and his brother Fidel Castro as the final decision makers. It also talks about after they had identified the presence of these flights in the area, that they had pilots practicing locating and following low, slow-flying civilian aircraft like the ones used by the group involved here. So it gives you some of that sort of tactical work that they have evidence, they believe, to support that. And really relying on a chain of command, that if in the Cuban structure at that time that Raul Castro was the defense minister and was in the position to give the, as they describe it here, the kill order, that is evidence they're laying out. It includes some photographs and things. They don't read well when they're printed, but you get a sense of it. It shows you the aircraft and a picture of Castro at the time. Now, I think the biggest question right now is where is Castro and what happens to him?
Right.
Because we have
remember they
seen
gave
many
him the
cases
option
where
to
there are
leave.
people who are
They gave him
indicted
his
abroad who are
girl,
not brought to the
you know,
United States to
option
evade
to
that
leave,
kind
guys.
of justice within a jurisdiction where this indictment came down. We don't have, based on our reporting, any indication of any specific attempts to try to extract him. Our colleague Jesse Kirsch, who was in the room, asked about the visit of the CIA director. And it would be hard for me to imagine that circumstances like this would not have been discussed in some way, not necessarily revealing this indictment, but talking about the kind of legal peril Castro could face and using that as a leverage point. That'll take more reporting to sort out. But that's the context and why Jesse's question was relevant here.
Kelly, to go back to the indictment, because I think this is very important. If we compare this indictment to the Maduro indictment, they are very different. The Maduro indictment had times and places. It named narco traffickers that members of Maduro's family had met with. I mean, there were several instances where they looked like they were connecting drug trafficking directly to Nicolas Maduro. Not that the U.S. may not have more evidence against Raul Castro, but, you know, I think the acting attorney general got ahead of maybe some of the headlines saying this is not a show indictment. And that essentially means we're not going to lay out all the evidence we have. We're not going to overwhelm the readers of this with the facts that we may have or may not have.
And certainly the time and place is very different. So the charges against Maduro are far more contemporary. This is 30 years ago against a hostile adversary where there might have been limitations on the kind of evidence the U.S. could obtain. They have obtained some of this that gives sort of the working operational details of how these flights were targeted and then shot down. But you're right, this is not the kind of contemporary crime in play being recorded and tracked by federal authorities based on what we're seeing here. We'll, of course, wait. Will there be a trial and will evidence be presented in court?
Shout out to Nini for gifting those 5 memberships. If you receive one of those and you are in the building, make sure you thank her because she did it and she didn't have to. Shout out to you, Nini. Thank you for gifting those 5 memberships.
But it is a historical narrative. It is details about the individuals, not only Castro, but 5 others. As we've discussed, they were pilots as a part of this mission. And there will be enormous pressure now politically and both domestic politics for the United States and international politics for the administration. But for the Department of Justice, and for the Trump administration, this is an opportunity to check a box that has been waiting for a very, very long time on serious charges that relate to the deaths of Americans long ago, but still very relevant in terms of how some of these issues are playing out. At the same time that there's this stranglehold posture that the United States is having against the current modern day moment of Cuba to try to pressure the regime by cutting off sources of their income and energy and all of those things that are ramping up the pressure. Timed also with the Secretary of State, who was not present today, talking to the Cuban people directly. So many layers to this, Tom. The
Yeah.
document is important, the charges are important, but so is all the context we've been talking about.
And ultimately, a grand jury did choose to indict, and a jury will see the evidence at some point if Raul Castro is ever brought to trial. We thank you for watching. And
all right, so there was more on Mr. Castro, guys. All right, so the Trump admin, basically the DOJ and the FBI worked hand in hand to bring down these indictments on Castro, guys. All right, so I know everybody is wondering, well, okay, what Trump have to say? Well, Trump gave a speech today. It says Trump delivers U.S. Coast Guard Academy commencement speech today. Let's see if he said anything about it, knowing that it was going to basically be in the headlines. This is Trump, guys, and what he had to say today during his briefing.
So I was just watching. We have big news on Cuba, as you know, with the indictment of Castro. So they've a lot of people have suffered very big, very at levels that few people would understand. And I think the Cuban population of Miami, and certainly beyond Miami, people that came there that were decimated, whose families were ruined, appreciate what the Attorney General just did today and was just doing now. He's just watching it. So we have Cuba on our mind. Very important. It's been a lot of problem for a lot of years, and this was I think it was a very big moment for people that, not only Cuban Americans, but people that came from Cuba, that want to go back to Cuba, people that want to see their family in Cuba. I think this is a very big day, very important day. They supported me to the nth degree. They supported me at levels that nobody's ever seen before. And so I think it's a very important moment.
Mr. President?
Say it?
What's coming next for Cuba?
Well, we're going to see. It's a failing nation. You see that. It's falling apart. They have no oil. They have no money. It's a failing nation, so I just can't tell you that. But we're there to help. We're there to help the families, the people. And again, a lot of those people are related to me in the sense that I've had such a great relationship with Cuban Americans. They supported me at a 94% level. That's a pretty good level. And their relatives are there. So we got to, on a humanitarian basis, we're there to help.
Mr. President was there last week.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that at all?
Well, we have a lot of people there. We had CIA there. We have Marco is there. Marco's parents, as you know, were from Cuba. So we have a lot of expertise in Cuba. And it's not going to be like the biggest thing we've ever done, but I will tell you, to a lot of people, it's going to be one of the most important. They've been looking for this moment for 65 years. So we'll see what happens. But we're going to, in the meantime, we're going to have to help them out. They have no way of living. They have no food. They have no electricity. They have no energy at all. But they do have great people. There are a lot of great people. I mean, I have so many Cuban friends in Miami, mostly in Miami and Florida, and they're unbelievable people. They're unbelievable entrepreneurs, and they'd like to go back. I think hopefully they're going to want to live here, but they want to go back. Maybe they'll invest. We'll see what happens. But we're freeing up Cuba.
Mr. President, how much longer do you anticipate the embargo having to be in place on Cuba?
We'll see. We'll be announcing it pretty soon.
On the table here, Mr. President, should we expect any escalation here, or should they expect?
With Cuba?
Yes.
No, you won't. There won't be escalation. I don't think there needs to be. Look, the place is falling apart. It's a mess, and they've sort of lost control. They've really lost control of Cuba. I don't want to say that.
Mr. President, Gavin Newsom is on Capitol Hill today. He says that he doesn't think J.D. Vance has what it takes to come after you. What's your response to that?
Who said that?
Gavin Newsom.
He said it doesn't have what?
He says that the era of Trump ends with you, and that J.D. Vance doesn't have what it takes to come after you.
Well, look, we've done a lot, and JD's very talented. He's a smart guy. He'll do very well if it's JD. We have a lot of very talented people. So I think
he was talking about the situation with Cuba, Nini.
Easy to run.
And now he's
a lot.
talking about
We're doing a lot.
J.D. Vance.
JD's a very talented guy.
Iran have to respond after you said yesterday you're about an hour away from making a decision. Where does that stand today? Have you heard anything from them?
It's right on the borderline, believe me. If we don't get the right answers, it goes very quickly. We're all ready to go. We have to get the right answers. It would have to be a complete 100% good answers. And if we do, we save a lot of time, energy, and lives, most importantly.
How long will you wait?
Could go very quickly, or a few days. It could be a few days, but it could go very quickly. Iran is a defeated nation. We're dealing with some people, and actually, I must tell you, we're dealing with some very good people. We're dealing with people that are, I think, far more reasonable than the people that are really no longer with us. We're dealing with some people with talent, with good brain power, and we're pretty impressed by it. So hopefully those people will make a deal that's going to be great for everybody. But I don't know. Do I get what? I never get tired. But what I like to do, if I can save war by waiting a couple of days, or I can save people being killed by waiting a couple of days, I think it's a great thing to do.
What's your message to him? Like my first day at home, his last show.
I'll have a message at a later date. Okay.
Sir, on Iran, did the U.S. offer Iran oil sanctions relief during these talks, as Iranian TV has reported?
No, I haven't heard that. No. I'm not doing any relief until they sign an agreement. When they sign an agreement, we can get that place built up again and have something that's really a good country for the people. But no, we haven't offered anything.
Scared by the rise of AI. They're worried that their kids are not going to be able to have jobs someday because AI will
I'll tell you, AI has been amazing because right now we have more jobs, more people working right now in the United States by far than we ever had before. And outside of the war, and I assumed the economy was going to go down, the stock market would go down 20-25%. It's actually up. The stock market is higher now than it was before I started the Iran situation. And on the Iran, I had no choice because they were going to have a nuclear weapon. We're not going to give them a nuclear weapon. But that's going to end soon, one way or the other. Oil is going to come tumbling down. There's so much oil. We have 1,600 ships in the Strait that are loaded up with oil that are going to be coming out very soon. So we'll have to see. But the military has been unbelievable. The blockade has been infallible. Not one ship has gotten through the blockade. 37 have tried. They all wish they didn't.
Can you tell us about your call with Erdogan?
Yeah, I had a very good call with President Erdogan, and pretty standard. We have a very good relationship. Isn't it nice that I have relationships with some very tough people? He's a tough guy, and but I have a relationship with him that nobody else does. He's actually done a good job. He's been, I think very much of an ally. Some people would doubt that, but I think he's been a great ally, and his people respect him. His people respect him a lot.
Mr. President, response to many people that are critical of your settlement over your IRS case about the tax now that you can't be prosecuted for tax.
Yeah, well, what happened is I was suing IRS for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is they released my tax returns, which they're not allowed to do. Now, they showed I pay a lot of tax. I may even release my current returns because they show I pay a lot of money. But they're not supposed to do that. They were in lockboxes as president. And they released them. And a certain firm released them, which was, I guess, a private firm. But it released them to a lot of the fake news. And the fake news went, and you're just not allowed to do that. And many other things happened. So I released them from the lawsuit, and I guess they made a settlement of some kind. I wasn't involved in the settlement. I could have been involved, but I didn't choose to be. So they made a settlement. Also, the anti-weaponization of people. I mean, people were destroyed. They went to jail. Their families were ruined. They committed suicide. All the Biden administration and the Obama administration, both of them. I mean, the Obama administration started it. The Biden administration was horrible in terms of what they've done to people is incredible. and we're reimbursing those people for their legal fees and for their costs and for anybody involved. But they destroyed people committing. I read the other day, a person committed suicide over it. They went, it was the most violent thing I've ever seen in politics, what they did. And yet if I say, oh, let's look at this one or that one, they say weaponization. What they did in terms of weaponization will never be allowed to happen in this country again. So we think that we think that anybody involved in that process should partake. And you're talking about peanuts compared to the value. It destroyed the lives of many, many people. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, so that was Trump. You know what I'm saying? Hold on, I wanted to bring that back. Hold on a second. Give me a second. I wanted y'all to who may have missed what he said regarding Castro. Hold up. Hold up real quick. Let me just go back to where I was at. Hold on. All right, let's go here.
I think it was a very big moment for people that
This is what he had to say about Cuba.
But, people that came from Cuba, that want to go back to Cuba, people that want to see their family in Cuba. I think this is a very big day, very important day. They supported me to the nth degree. They supported me at levels that nobody's ever seen before. And so I think it's a very important moment.
Mr. President, Mr. President.
Say it.
What's next for Cuba?
Well, we're going to see. It's a failing nation. You see that. It's falling apart. They have no oil. They have no money. It's a failing nation. So I just can't tell you that. But we're there to help. We're there to help the families, the people. And again, a lot of those people are related to me in the sense that I've had such a great relationship with Cuban Americans. They supported me at a 94% level. That's a pretty good level. And their relatives are there. So we got to, on a humanitarian basis, we're there to help.
Mr. President was there last week.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that at all?
Well, we have a lot of people there. We had CIA there. We have Marco is there. Marco's parents, as you know, were from Cuba. So we have a lot
this is Trump speaking on Cuba, guys.
And it's not going to be like the biggest thing we've ever done, but I will tell you, to a lot of people, it's going to be one of the most important. They've been looking for this moment for 65 years. So we'll see what happens. But we're going to, in the meantime, we're going to have to help them out. They have no way of living. They have no food. They have no electricity. They have no energy at all. But they do have great people. There are a lot of great people. I mean, I have so many Cuban friends in Miami, mostly in Miami and Florida, and they're unbelievable people. They're unbelievable entrepreneurs, and they'd like to go back. I think hopefully they're going to want to live here, but they want to go back. Maybe they'll invest. We'll see what happens. But we're freeing up Cuba.
Mr. President, how much longer do you anticipate the embargo having to be in place on Cuba?
We'll see. We'll be announcing it pretty soon.
On the table here, Mr. President, should we expect any escalation here, or should they expect
with Cuba?
Yes.
No, there won't be escalation. I don't think there needs to be. Look, the place is falling apart. It's a mess, and they've sort of lost control. They've really lost control of Cuba.
You think Raul is right? Would you take military action like you did?
I don't want to say that.
Mr. President, Gavin Newsom is on Capitol Hill today. He says that he doesn't think.
All right, so that's what Trump had to say regarding Cuba, guys. Basically, that it's a failing country, and he most definitely spoke on the arresting of Castro, guys. All right, let's go here.
Former Cuban President Raul Castro has been indicted in the U.S. That is according to a senior Trump administration official who spoke with Reuters. Now, the charges against the 94-year-old are reportedly based on a 1996 incident in which Cuban jets shot down planes that were operated by a group of Cuban exiles. President Trump has been vocal about seeking regime change in Cuba, where communists have been in charge since Castro's late brother, Fidel, led the revolution in 1959. A lot to discuss here, so I do want to bring in Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, a Republican from Florida, to discuss it all. Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And I want to get your overall reaction here. We're hearing from Reuters and, of course, from the Department of Justice that Raul Castro is being indicted there. So explain to me your overall reaction.
It's about time. And it took President Trump to finally not look the other way when Americans are murdered in cold blood, premeditated murder in cold blood. As you were mentioning, these were two civilian Cessnas shot down by direct orders of Raul Castro, who were in international airspace. And that happened during the Clinton administration. And there was an indictment reportedly being prepared to indict Raul and Fidel Castro for this murder, for ordering the murder. And yet, under the Clinton administration, they basically threw that in a drawer, locked it up, didn't want to deal with it, I guess not to offend the Castro dictatorship. It took it took this president and this administration to finally bring justice to these families. Now, remember, these were 4 individuals, 3 Americans and 1 American resident, who were murdered in cold blood. And for 30 years, nothing happened to the one who gave the order until today. And that is precisely because of the leadership, the courage, and the resolve to protect the American people of President Trump and his administration.
And of course, we're talking about the former president there of Cuba. He is 94 years old, I believe. So my question is this mostly symbolic overall, or is there more to it?
No, there's more to it, because Raul Castro is the dictator, the undisputed power in that island. He doesn't have the title of president, but he's the undisputed leader or dictator of that island. He is responsible for all the money, by the way, that regime takes in through their really kind of like disastrous economy, goes in essence through this group called Gaesa, run by the Cuban military, controlled by Raul Castro and his family. So while the Cuban people are literally starving and they have no electricity, no water, the Castro family through Gaesa are sitting on about 18 to 20 billion dollars that they're sitting on, that they used to repress.
820 billion is what they got.
Their relatives travel the world in yachts while the Cuban people are starving. But for our interest, for the United States, here's the issue. This is a state sponsor of terrorism that harbors fugitives from U.S. law, harbors terrorists, Hezbollah, Hamas, ETA, FARC, etc., that has listening stations from both China and Russia, that has allowed nuclear submarines of our adversarial countries to dock 90 miles away from the United States, and that, as has been reported in the press recently, which has been known for a while, they have about at least 300 drones that they purchased from the Iranians. All of that is to threaten the United States of America. We have a president that's not willing to look the other way, and I could not be prouder of President Trump and his team finally standing up for the American people, which, by the way, also helps the Cuban people in the cause for freedom on that island.
And I have to ask here, what do you want to see happen next? Now that an indictment has been handed up here, we know that the Department of Justice is going to be speaking on this. And what do you want to see happen overall to Raul Castro?
Well, look, it's interesting. The law of the United States, as passed by Congress starting from the mid-90s, is very simple, that when a few things happen on the island, all sanctions go away. And actually, there's even assistance ready to go to help the Cuban people, which is they have to free all the political prisoners. They have to allow for some basic freedoms, freedom of the press, political parties, labor unions, et cetera, and then have the process of elections. Once that happens, the so-called sanctions, the so-called embargo, goes away. Until then, frankly, what needs to happen is a change of leadership in that island. That island is still controlled by one guy and his family that have done horrible things to the United States. They have sent troops abroad for decades. By the way, here's an interesting fact. According to the Ukrainian intelligence services, there are anywhere between 5 to 20,000 Cubans fighting against Ukraine for Russia right now. So they've sent troops abroad. They harbor terrorists. They are the open door for all of the adversaries of the United States, and they have a very aggressive espionage, anti-American espionage network in the United States. That regime has to go, and I think it's on its last leg because the Cuban people are demonstrating every day and every night. They can't organize because they can't communicate. They don't have access to the internet, et cetera. But this president and this administration finally is on the sides of the U.S. national security interest, which coincides with being on the side of the Cuban people in their desire for a free, democratic, not terrorist Cuba.
Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and discuss this much further. Anything else that we missed? Anything you want to add before I let you go?
Yeah, look, it's important to note that this is an important moment because for some on the radical left, Castro is a symbol, by the way, of anti-Americanism, which is why they like him, by the way. And this now shows the world this is not some benign figure who's an old dude. This is a guy who's a murderer, now an indicted murderer, who's also been involved in terrorism, in the murder of people, including the murder of Americans. Now, hard to defend the murderer for those on the radical left that like to defend Castro or every other anti-American dictator.
All right, Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so there went some more details on the Castro situation. Don't forget that I showed y'all earlier about the bombing, guys. I mean, the drones. They have reported that Cuba was in possession of 300 drones that they were going to use to strike the U.S., guys. It's crazy. Hold on. Let's go here.
Developments in Cuba as of late. Of course, in recent months, the U.S. has been performing a blockade against Cuba's energy infrastructure. Let's check in with Fox's Dana Marie McNichol. She has the latest reporting on what the president is saying about the situation.
They need help, as you know.
President Trump is softening his tone as the humanitarian crisis in Cuba intensifies. He's now pushing for a diplomatic solution to ease tensions and improve relations. On Thursday, he sent CIA Director John Ratcliffe to Havana to meet with high-ranking officials, bringing this message. If Cuba is willing to make big changes, the U.S. is ready to lend a hand.
They are really a nation or a country in decline, so we're going to see. We have a lot to talk about on Cuba.
The visit came just hours after the State Department offered the Cuban government $100 million in emergency aid, which Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel said he would accept.
$100 million is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, in terms of what Cuba has cost us over the last 60 years, this could be a reasonably small investment.
The U.S. is also indicating that it's willing to allow more oil shipments to Cuba, but it's not clear if the country can foot the bill.
They don't have the money to pay for the oil, and nobody's willing to give them the credit.
At the same time, the White House is warning the Cuban government to not cross any of President Trump's red lines. And top administration officials have made it clear they'd still like to see regime change in Havana.
You cannot change the economic trajectory of Cuba as long as the people who are in charge of it now are in charge of it.
Cuba's energy minister announced Thursday that the country has now exhausted all of its fuel reserves. In Miami, Dana Marie McNichol, Fox News.
Okay. While all that's been going on, this has also been percolating at the same time. Government sources are telling several news outlets that the DOJ plans to indict Cuba's Raul Castro. Castro is 94 years old. He's the former president of Cuba, and he's the brother of Fidel Castro. Here's the photo that the CIA posted of Ratcliffe in Cuba. We, of course, have been tracking these developments closely. Reuters' sources say the potential indictment, by the way, is expected to focus on the downing of planes decades ago. New York Post with this, saying the U.S. is moving to indict former Cuban leader Raul Castro. The indictment has not come down yet. It's a potential for now. Again, several U.S. news sources saying that they have sources within the administration that expect that this is going to happen soon. Let's bring in national security analyst, retired Marine intelligence officer, and the host of the Strap podcast, Hal Kemper, to discuss this. Hal, Cuba's been under a U.S. energy blockade for months. It's had crippling effects, that blockade. Do we know why this possible indictment is coming down now?
Well, there's a variety of reasons, Austin, but the big one is I think it's the utter collapse of the Cuban economy. They've completely run out of gas. Literally, they've run out of gas. Their power, I think they're getting maybe a couple hours of power per day, which makes it very difficult for people to cook or do anything else. You know, they can't turn on their TV.
Yeah, it's bad over there, guys. It is bad in Cuba.
Very, very difficult to just simply operate in Cuba, period. And with that collapse is you're really hearing it with man on the street sort of discussions that they're pretty fed up with the regime. And so I think they're looking at this and they're looking at Raul Castro, even though he is out of power, 94 years old. His grandson, Raulito, as he's called, little Raul, is the main interlocutor between us and the Cuban government and discussions. Well, as long as Castro's still calling the shots, he's the kingpin, if you will. He's the key person there. So I think they're all looking at this saying, you know, if for some reason he could be neutralized, I don't mean that in some sort of pejorative Hollywood sense. I mean, neutralizes a political influence, that this might open up the door for significant change in Cuba. And if Cuba changes, that changes really the entire hemisphere, because Cuba was that base for Russia and Chinese influence, later Chinese influence in the hemisphere. That was where they exported things that would show up in places like Nicaragua, Venezuela, Bolivia, elsewhere throughout the hemisphere. So if Cuba was to change over, become pro-U.S., pro-Western, that would really solidify U.S. dominance of this entire side of the planet, to give you an idea of just how big that is.
A live look at the White House, where President Trump just returned from his visit to China, approaching 7:30 on the East Coast. Trump's administration, Hal, the administration, they've called Cuba's current communist-run government corrupt and incompetent. If the U.S. had its way, what are the main changes that it would want to see in Cuba and with the government itself?
Well, the question is, will they work with this government? You know, we saw that in Venezuela, where certainly there was no amount of negative rhetoric about the Maduro administration, the Maduro regime. Yet, when we went in there and we did that amazing special operation to take Maduro and take him up to New York, we ended up with Delcy Rodriguez, his vice president, basically working with her and not changing out everything, just working with the administration. So the question is there a criteria whereby we would work with this current administration, more or less, minus Raul's influence, where we could work with them? And I think they got both options running simultaneously. One is total collapse of the regime, changes over, different group comes into power. And the other is, can we do a hybrid where we kind of work with these guys, but we completely change the rules by which they operate? And I think we're pursuing both simultaneously. So I don't think we've ruled anything out. When we say we're willing to negotiate with them, we're willing to send $100 million down there to help them out. I think we're trying to work both these paths simultaneously and see which one actually comes about. And of course, if they're obstinate and they push back and they say they're going to take the $100 million, but will they make the changes necessary to get it? That's a big question, because that goes antithetical to what the regime is all about. And so there's a very good chance this thing could just collapse further. And we're already seeing it. People on the streets are banging pans. They're yelling and stuff, calling for change. And at some point, those protests, those demonstrations will get a lot more virulent. And eventually they'll find their way into government offices and buildings, and we'll see what happens then.
So just to kind of go over the procedure here, if an indictment were to come, if there is one, it would first need to be approved by a grand jury. The Miami Herald puts it this way.
That was most definitely one,
The
exactly for what they
Raul
said it was
for
for, guys.
a 1996 shootdown is expected to be unsealed
They delivered the
in
speech
Miami
today.
next week. Time will tell if that's how this will play out. But again, a grand jury would need to approve this indictment. How significant, let's just talk about Raul Castro for a moment here, Hal. How significant of a figure is Raul today?
He is incredibly central to what that regime is all about. You got to remember, this is Fidel Castro's brother. We all focus on Fidel Castro, 1959, the revolution, obviously, his defiant stance when the Bay of Pigs invasion fell apart. And then, of course, the missiles of October in 1962, where, Soviet nuclear warheads and missiles were taken out of Cuba. And then all the things that have happened since is, pushing revolution across Latin America, causing all sorts of problems back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, with communist-inspired insurgencies and things going on. So obviously we see Fidel, but we often forget Raul was right beside him the whole time. That was his right hand. That's his brother. That's his right-hand guy. And Raul, certainly during the latter years, was, even when Fidel was in power, Raul was basically running stuff. So he's been absolutely central to everything going on. So and I will say that it's kind of interesting because certainly there's discussion of it. If Raul is indicted by a grand jury, would the U.S. try to do something like they did with Maduro? I think it would be a lot more complicated and more difficult to pull off in Havana. But it is a fascinating idea. I don't think we'll do that, but there is a distinct possibility that with that indictment, Raul could end up getting moved somewhere else to some other country, or they could just move him aside in some way. So a lot of interesting possibilities. That would be a big, big change symbolically, but also functionally in terms of how Cuba actually operates.
There was a huge military buildup in the Caribbean before the Maduro operation took place. Would a similar type of buildup have to happen if something like that were to be considered in the future?
Well, rhetorically, the White House has kind of alluded to something like that happening. Now, right now, we're really tied up with this war in Iran, with the naval blockade and all this stuff, where we might go back to full kinetics here very shortly. So we don't have any extra capacity to pull something like that off. So I'm not anticipating that. Although, if you start tracking intelligence flights, these are intelligence gathering aircraft. We've seen a distinct uptick in the intelligence gathering aircraft, particularly around the two biggest cities, Havana, it being, of course, the biggest city in Cuba. And so obviously we're listening to more, we're looking at more, we're certainly preparing. We're doing that kind of intelligence preparation of the operational environment or battle space, potentially, if we have to do something like that. But I think there's a lot of people whispering into President Trump's ear saying, we do not want to go militarily into Cuba. We do not want to do that because that would be a mess. It's difficult terrain, difficult country to operate in. And obviously we'd deal with what would then be a massive insurgency against us. So I think they're looking for other types of options. Military may be involved, but not in the direct kinetic sense.
All right, so that was a little bit more on the situation in Cuba, guys. This is how Cubans are living right now with this massive blackout, as their dictator is arrested.
As they face a major power grid situation, they were without power just a couple of days ago, a major blackout on the island. Not only are they facing this electricity problem, but also an economic problem as well. And really, to add more into it, President Trump earlier this week was talking about a, quote, friendly takeover of Cuba. For more on this, I want to bring in our next guest to help break it all down, what is happening right now in Cuba and also the U.S.-Cuba relations. Dr. Andy Gomez, a Cuba scholar, former director at University of Miami. Great to have you on. And first off, Doctor, what did you make of President Trump's comments earlier this week?
I don't know what he means. I mean,
He said the same thing about Venezuela, and Venezuela is being run by the Venezuelans, Delcy Rodriguez. I don't know what he means by a friendly takeover of Cuba. There's no one in Cuba that's going to hand over Raul Castro. I don't think that it's in the best interest of the United States at this moment to invade or attack Cuba. So I don't know what the president meant by that.
And Doctor, tell us what is going on with the electricity issues in Cuba and just how dire it is.
This is the worst problem that they have right now. The electrical system in Cuba was left in ill repairs after the Soviet Union fell apart. It's not a problem of not having oil. It's a problem that the system doesn't work anymore. And the engineers, the electrical experts that I know tell me that they need a new one. They need a new system for the country at a cost of $8 to $10 billion. So there's no way of repairing the current electrical system. It will continue to break to the point that it just won't work anymore.
Yeah, and that is definitely what we don't want to see with the issues that are going on right now in Cuba, and then also President Trump making those statements. What do you think Russia is thinking about this situation? Because they would not want a U.S. takeover of Cuba.
That's a very good question. Well, it's reported this afternoon, and I haven't gotten confirmation, that there are Russian tankers with oil on the way to Cuba. Now, we have to wait and see if the United States so-called ships that are in the Caribbean around Cuba are going to let these Russian oil tankers go into Cuba. Russia, as we all know, have their own problems in the war with Ukraine. Their resources, their military has been depleted. So I don't see Russia coming to the aid of Cuba unless we bombard Cuba or we invade Cuba. But even then, I really don't see Russia getting involved at this moment.
Is there any pressure points that the U.S. could do to try to force a regime change? And is there anybody in Cuba right now that the U.S. would take as a leader there?
Well, you know, one of the problems is that throughout the years, both Republican and Democratic administrations, we haven't had contact with the Cuban military, which runs everything in Cuba, including the economy, as you know. Raul Castro is going to turn 95 years old this year, and he's the one that caused the last shot. There has been lots of speculation, a lot of reporting that one of the Castros is going to take over if they fire Miguel Diaz-Canel. I think it's a little early to see that. We have seen in the last 72, 48 hours, Diaz-Canel fire back, that he's very much in control, in power. One thing that I can tell you for sure, I don't know, no one knows who's going to replace Raul Castro once he's gone. And that's when I think most of the problems, if you can believe it, can get worse in Cuba.
And how do you see that once that day does happen, how could it spiral very quickly, would you say?
Well, you know, this is not a failed state. And why isn't it not a failed state? For instance, I consider Haiti a failed state. The military is very much in control of Cuba, both from a military point of view and from the economic point of view. They control over 65% of Cuba's economy. Once Raul Castro is out of the picture, we have to wait and see who is going to be that person, that group that is going to take control of Cuba. One thing that I know for sure, during the Obama administration established diplomatic relations with Cuba, the Cuban inner circle, there were people in the Cuban inner circle that wanted to establish better relationships with the United States, knowing that their economy was fast going downhill. Today, there's still people inside the Cuban inner circle that want to improve the relationship with the United States. During the last 2 months, now it has been confirmed by the president of Cuba and by the United States conversations, I'm not going to say negotiations, but conversations have been going on behind the scenes. And there's a lot of speculation going on as to who said what, who said that. So we have to be very careful. Now, Cuba is at its worst point that it's been since the revolution started in 1959. Economically, socially. There's no food. There's no medicine. You mentioned electricity. They can go weeks with the electrical system malfunctioning. The Archbishop of Santiago de Cuba, who visited Miami not too long ago, when I had dinner with him, told me he wasn't getting water on a regular basis. Every 36 hours, if he was lucky, he got water. So we have a problem in Cuba in terms of social and economic. And Cuba, being a centralized economy, doesn't have an infrastructure to change it, or their capability to change it. Their own bureaucracy, if you will, within the system is so complicated that they don't know how to improve it. That in itself, and this is what concerns me, that in itself can cause a social explosion that we have seen in the past. But Fidel Castro, Raul's brother, as we know, was masterful at when the pressure cooker, as I called it, was ready to blow up. He let the air out of it a little bit. What do I mean by that? Well, going back to 1965, anybody that wanted to leave Cuba could leave Cuba. And we saw it in 65. We saw it in the Mario boat lift. We saw it in the Barcelo crisis. We've seen it throughout. We've seen it between 1922 and 1924. 253,000 Cubans crossed the border from Mexico into the United States. But the rules have changed. And now, where are these Cubans going to go? Anywhere in the world. For instance, I just learned there's 46,000 Cubans in Brazil. There's 26,000 Cubans in Uruguay. More interesting, I got a call last week. Radio Australia wanted to know or interview me about Cuba. And really, I asked them, why all the way out in Australia you're interested in Cuba? I didn't know there were 300 Cubans in Australia. At one point, Australia gave them land to farm and to raise sheep. So Cubans, and especially young Cubans that I've spoken to in the last 2 weeks, are telling me the first chance they get, they're going to leave Cuba. And that creates another problem because that's Cuba's future. That's Cuba's future. And if they leave, that will be a vacuum in the long run leadership of the country.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, when we're talking about basic needs not being fulfilled there in the country for the people, water, electricity, just those basic necessities.
Housing.
Yeah, housing. Is there any...
look at the pictures that you showed. I mean, it's crumbling. They're falling apart. There's not enough housing. I mean, you have 10, 20 people.
So with all of that, should the U.S. intervene on a humanitarian crisis? Could they say that's the reason we need to intervene?
That's a very good question. And let me tell you, we do have the economic embargo in place since the early 60s.
They came there that were decimated, whose families were ruined. Appreciate what the Attorney General just did today and was just doing now. He's just watching it. So we have Cuba on our mind. Very important. Been a lot of problems for a lot of years, and this was I think it was a very big moment for people that, not only Cuban Americans, but people that came from Cuba that want to go back to Cuba, people that want to see their family in Cuba. I think this is a very big day, very important day. They supported me to the nth degree. They supported me at levels that nobody's ever seen before. And so I think it's a very important moment.
Mr. President, what's coming next for Cuba?
Well, we're going to see. It's a failing nation. You see that. It's falling apart. They have no oil. They have no money. It's a failing nation, so I just can't tell you that. But we're there to help. We're there to help the families, the people. And again, a lot of those people are related to me in the sense that I've had such a great relationship with Cuban Americans. They supported me at a 94% level. That's a pretty good level. And their relatives are there. So we got to, on a humanitarian basis, we're there to help.
There last week.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that at all?
Well, we have a lot of people there. We have the CIA there. We have Marco is there. Marco's parents, as you know, were from Cuba. So we have a lot of expertise in Cuba. And it's not going to be like the biggest thing we've ever done, but I will tell
My
you.
bad, guys. We already watched this one. Hold on. Hold up. It's more. There's most definitely more. Hold on real quick.
Where the Justice Department unveiled criminal charges against former Cuban President Raul Castro. This is related to Cuba's 1996 shootdown of humanitarian planes. U.S. leaders told CBS News earlier this month Castro would face those charges. Castro stepped down as leader in 2021, but remains a powerful figure in Cuba. So let's go live to Miami and CBS News correspondent Christian Benavidez. Christian, Castro's 94 years old at this point. As we look at that split screen and we see that podium there, the big question right now, why charge him at this age?
Right, a lot of questions. I mean, is the U.S. Justice Department and the Trump administration going to take an additional step and actually bring Raul Castro here to Miami to face justice? I mean, that's the question. It's not clear whether they would do that or whether they would use this indictment as a pressure point in order to enact regime change in Cuba. Just a few moments ago, the indictment was announced. Sources had told CBS News that this was going to happen today. And just a few moments ago, I heard cheering from a crowd of Cuban Americans that's standing outside the Freedom Tower here in Miami, where that press conference is set to be held. Now, this indictment all has to do with the shoot down of two humanitarian planes, the humanitarian planes part of Brothers to the Rescue. This was a group that went out into the Florida Straits, went out into international waters, and helped Cubans who were making their way from the communist island looking for freedom, and they were making their way here to Miami. So they had a fleet of about 10 planes that would go out and help Cubans who were in distress. They also participated in some pro-democracy missions, which included dropping leaflets.
So not only did Castro get charged, so did four other officials.
Were shot down. There was a third plane that was not shot down, and 4 people died. That includes 3 U.S. citizens and 1 U.S. resident. The Cuban American community here in Miami has, for decades, been calling for change in Cuba, and for the past 3 decades, calling for justice for those 4 men who were killed on that day. And as I mentioned just moments ago, when that indictment was announced, we heard cheering outside of the Freedom Tower. We're still waiting to hear from a number of speakers that are set to list off what the charges are going to be and just give us a sense of what else is in this indictment.
All right, Christian Benavidez, as we hear word of the cheers that likely come from generations of families who remember. Thank you so much. Turning now to CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gassis. Olivia, we're still watching that podium to see who steps forward there, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed the Cuban people in a video message earlier. What was the message?
That's right. Well, this was the first time that Rubio, who himself is the son of Cuban immigrants, spoke directly to the Cuban people as Secretary of State. And he chose to do it in Spanish and on the day that Cuba marks its independence from Spain and U.S. occupation. It was a sharp salvo against the government, as he has been doing. He said he blamed the government as the reason that the Cuban people have no electricity, no food, no fuel. He pointed to this business conglomerate run by the Cuban military, Gaesa, which controls most of the Cuban economy, as the main obstacle standing between the Cuban people and a better future, both domestically and in relation to the United States. And he reiterated this offer that the U.S. has been dangling of $100 million in humanitarian aid to be delivered directly to the Cuban people through Catholic charities. But officials that we've spoken to say that money hasn't yet moved. Negotiations are still continuing. Of course, Rubio's message sought to cast the U.S. and this administration in a sort of cooperative, benevolent light, but it's absolutely worth noting that Cuba's primary energy lifeline, which were these oil deliveries that came directly from Venezuela, evaporated virtually overnight after the U.S. removed Nicolas Maduro from power earlier this year. That, along with these punishing sanctions that the U.S. has levied on Cuban officials and institutions, has been a significant factor in pushing Cuba into one of the worst humanitarian and economic crises that it's seen in decades, Reed.
Such an inflection point. I used to live in Miami. I've covered this issue deeply, and I would imagine that the reaction will be resoundingly positive there in Miami if we hear more indictments of other Cuban officials. What are you hearing about that?
That's right. Well, I think that we are just learning what we had been reporting earlier, that the Justice Department is expected to unveil, or has unveiled now, an indictment of Cuba's 94-year-old former leader and defense minister, Raul Castro, with what appear to be 5 others on charges that we believe will be related to the shootdown, as Christian was telling you, of humanitarian planes in 1996. So you've heard this administration call the Cuban government corrupt. You've heard them call it incompetent, and now they are also seeking to label it as criminal with this federal indictment. And Reed, these legal moves are following a number of these other screw-tightening measures that this administration has reached for, including, again, the fresh sanctions. We got another swath on Monday against top military and intelligence officials, and at the same time, trying to keep a diplomatic track alive and progressing. Last week, dispatching the CIA director to meet with senior officials in Havana. And again, this humanitarian relief package that appears to be tied to the same demand that this administration has had, that the government in Cuba make requisite political changes that make it more palatable to the U.S. The question, of course, is whether those changes actually happen or whether those in power in Cuba really buckle down to outlast even more crushing American pressure.
Yeah, and we know this is a major voting bloc, and they are political, and they are politically active. You know, I've stood on the waters there, the shoreline of Miami. I've seen people arrive from Cuba who got into Miami through the wet foot, dry foot policy, and they all get off those boats, and they all say, Fidel Castro, Raul Castro destroyed our families businesses. In what sense is this indictment against Raul Castro also symbolic, and the Cuban people for generations feeling like this is perhaps some comeuppance for Fidel Castro and the Castro regime at large?
Absolutely. It is symbolic insofar as Raul Castro, as we've pointed out, is 94 years old. Even though he's not currently in power, he still wields an enormous amount of influence in Cuban politics. And Reed, we should say that the Cuban government has been trying to strenuously deny that it poses an active military threat to the United States. Its officials have said that it is not an aggressor, that it is combating outsized influence from the United States, and doesn't harbor any threat. This has come as there's been, sorry, my phone is going off here.
Listen, you're a reporter. Your sources are calling you. We understand, friend. It's okay.
Sorry about that. This is coming as we've heard reports of drones that the Cuban government has accumulated, and whether those would be a factor should there be an external military confrontation. Now, we do not sense that one is imminent, but it has become more of a possibility as, again, the United States has pointed to the need for the government to demonstrate that it is willing to change in order to get to a more cooperative relationship, is what we understood the CIA director to have relayed to senior officials there, that the U.S. pointing to what they see as a productive relationship now in Venezuela, wants to see a different set of leadership at the top, and wants to engage economically to the extent that is possible, but it won't be possible with the interlocutors that it currently has there.
All right, Olivia, thank you so much. We likely will be checking back into you as news breaks throughout this hour. Thank you so much. Good to talk to you. Let's go back to Miami and CBS News correspondent Christian Benavides there. I'm always fascinated in covering this story. I remember also standing at a prominent cathedral. I know you'll know the name of it, that pays tribute to those who came through rough waters to come to the shores of the United States. If you can capture this moment from the perspective of the mothers and fathers, the grandmothers, the grandfathers, and what the significance of this is, not only is this indictment connected to the 1996 downing of planes, but this has also got to be symbolic for so many families who say they suffered under the Castro regime, lost their businesses, lost their homes, and many of them died.
Reed, absolutely. I mean, you have to think about the families that had their businesses seized and that had to live through this brutal authoritarian regime that is still in power. Now, it's important to note that Cuba is at one of its weakest, if not the weakest moment that it has ever been. So people here in South Florida see what's happening on the island. They do see it. They see their family members suffering through the blackout, suffering through the lack of food, and through those brutal conditions. But overwhelmingly, the belief here is that change may be around the corner for so many Cuban Americans who live here in South Florida. I spoke to Jose Basulto, who was on the third plane. I mentioned, these humanitarian planes that are at the center of this indictment. Two of them were shut down. Jose Basulto was on the third plane, and he watched his friends be killed on international waters by the Cuban regime. And what he told me was
so Castro and 4 others indicted by the DOJ in the U.S., guys.
That he feels that change in Cuba is closer than it ever has been before in the past. And I'll tell you, there's a small crowd that's right outside the Freedom Tower, and every so often we hear them cheering. I don't know what they're watching, but we hear them cheering, and we hear the joy from so many Cuban Americans who are here in South Florida. After seeing what happened in Venezuela, one thing that I would caution is that in Venezuela, you have Delcy Rodriguez, who is still part of the Maduro regime that is in power there, though they are collaborating with the United States. Here, when you talk to Cuban Americans, they'll tell you directly that they do not want to see anyone from the regime still in power. And it is so difficult to find someone within the Cuban regime that could hold a position similar to Delcy, because most of the opposition lives here in Miami because they were either imprisoned in Cuba or had to flee from the communist island. So it is truly remarkable to hear the hope that so many Cuban Americans here have. They are ready for this change. They have been waiting for change in Cuba for decades, and they're seeing the humanitarian crisis that has been unfolding on the island, and they've been watching what the administration has been doing and hoping that they would be able to enact some sort of regime change.
I'm so jealous that you're there to get to record this story in real time. I think of the inscription at the base of the Statue of Liberty about huddled masses yearning to be free. That really typifies and captures the spirit of so many Cuban Americans there, likely toasting themselves with some Café Versailles Cafecito today. Nice to talk to you. As soon as we see somebody at that podium, we'll bring it to you. Christian Benavides, excellent reporting as always. All right, so we're also getting granular here. We're looking at what's in that indictment. So let's go live to CBS News Justice reporter Jake Rosen. You're starting to dig into it and see what the line items are. What are you seeing so far?
Yeah, that's right, Reed. We are waiting on the full indictment to be unsealed, but as these kind of trickle of court filings have come in, we do have an initial set and read on what the charges are alleged against former Cuban leader Raul Castro. The first charge, as Christian has spoken about in depth here, is conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals. That is just a singular count. There are 2 counts of a destruction of aircraft, as Christian just pointed out. 2 of those brothers to the rescue planes were shot down in the 1990s, carrying U.S. citizens and a U.S. resident.
What's up,
and that
Casey?
leads to the final charge, which is 4 counts of murder. And as Christian just pointed out, it was 3 U.S. citizens who were on board those planes attempting to rescue Cubans who were fleeing the island. And there was 1 U.S. resident who was also killed. We are waiting on a full unsealing of this indictment indictment, I would assume, just given how the Department of Justice typically plays things out. It could come at any moment as we await this presser, or meanwhile, while Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche and other law enforcement heads are set to be discussing this in depth. And I think one moment of clarity that we will get, just like the Nicolas Maduro indictment, was how deeply involved can the United States allege the involvement went from the top down of the government. As we know, in a similar comparison, it's likely that they're going to allege that simply because he's the former head of the country, that he had some direct knowledge of the order or directly ordered the shooting down of these planes. How granular can the United States get in that indictment? Do they have potential witnesses or documentation to back up these charges? And we will certainly find out more in a couple of moments on specifics.
I know you'll have it. Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
All right, guys. So that was more on the situation going on with Cuba, guys, as we hear that the dictator of Cuba basically has been hit with charges by the DOJ in the United States from 30 years ago, basically when he allegedly ordered the taking down, the taking down of a U.S. spacecraft, guys, airplane. You know what I'm saying? Basically took it down. 4 people were unalived in that. And basically the DOJ says not so fast. They say that Castro is 94 years old, guys. If you've been paying attention to the situation going on in Cuba, then you know that they are without power at this time. They are without gas at this time. They are without oil because the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz basically cut off their supplies, guys. And we got Trump going full-fledged at them now when it comes to their leader, Castro. 94 years old, is being charged with 4 counts of unaliving and 1 count of like taking down an airplane. He's 94 years old, guys. So 30 years later, he now faces charges. I don't know. But as they keep me updated, I most definitely will keep y'all updated. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, and you have not, make sure you double tap that screen, guys. That's how you hit the like button to show appreciation for the channel as well as support for the channel. We ain't asked you for anything monetarily, just ask that you hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we most definitely will be keeping you up to date with all the latest and breaking news, guys. If you subscribe to the channel, make sure you turn your notification bell on to all so you don't miss anything when everything news goes live. My normally scheduled time is Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. I kind of been off schedule, been sleeping a little later than usual, but I'm most definitely here on all of those days. And in case I don't be here, that's why you need to turn on your notification bell on to all. So therefore, when I do press the button, you most definitely be in attendance. Shout out to everybody that enjoyed the show. Most definitely take time to hit that like button. Most definitely take time to subscribe, guys. I will most definitely catch y'all later. Shout out to all of my old subscribers as well as my new ones. Shout out to all of my members, old ones as well as new ones. If you're looking to get a membership to support the channel another way, you most definitely can grab that by going to the description box of any video on this channel, guys. Just go to the home page and go to memberships. It should be a tab, guys. So shout out to all of my members, my old ones as well as my new ones, and most definitely shout out to my moderators. I know sometimes it get hectic with all these opinions, but all opinions are welcome, and thank y'all for keeping the chat rolling smooth. I catch y'all on the next one. Y'all stay safe. Sidewalk Gang, check in out. I'm gone, y'all. Y'all stay safe.